Good evening, traveller. Before we begin, take a breath. Let the day fade away, like ink dissolving in warm water. And if stories of forgotten times bring you calm, subscribe to the channel Whisper of Time. Here, history speaks softly. Tonight, I will tell you about a man whose courage was quiet, and whose silence saved a city. The city of Hoshino stood on low hills where the wind smelled of the sea and rice barns. By day its streets shimmered with light. By evening wind chimes rang softly from the eaves, a custom born from a blacksmith's fancy long ago. The wind played on the city like a flute, carrying laughter, footsteps, the squeak of wooden gates, and the slow rhythm of sandals on bridges. The one who guarded Hoshino was Ito Seijun, a samurai who did not care for grand titles. His armour bore no ornaments, his swords rarely left their scabbards, and his gaze seemed to look past walls, past this day, towards something deeper. He had been born here, he knew the scent of every street. When he walked along the docks, the moored boats swayed, as if the city itself nodded to its protector. People said Seijun could listen, not only to voices but to rain, to soil beneath his steps, even to silence itself. And perhaps that was why he heard first that silence had changed its tone. The banners on the northern road. In late autumn, when wreaths still hung in golden sheaves, a dusty trail appeared on the northern road. From the watchtower, the sentry Kinemaru squinted through his tube. In the distance, banners swayed, white stripes crossed by dark wedges. The crest of the Akasaga clan, a name whispered across the provinces. "They're coming?" Seijun asked quietly, climbing the tower. "They are, my lord, and not in haste. They bring wagons." Seijun nodded. Wagons meant supplies. Not raiders, but settlers of conquest. So winter was coming, not as a season, but as an army. He gathered the elders, merchants and captains. The council hall smelled of hot ink and tea. He spread a rough map, the rivers like veins across parchment. "They'll camp by the river bend," he said calmly. "From there they can choke the water in roads. We have a week, 10 days at most." "Send for aid," the elder Nakano urged. "Our liege house Yoshino must protect us." "The message has already left," Seijun said, "but the road is long. We must live this week as if it were a winter." He gave no speeches about dying gloriously. He simply said, "We will hold long enough for dawn to find us still standing." That was enough. The city began to move, slow, deliberate, without panic. Carpenters thickened the gate timbers, potters shaped jars for water and salt, blacksmiths hammered spearheads. He walked the walls himself, feeling the grain of the wood beneath his palm, breathing in pine smoke and damp clay. At the bridge, he met a little girl watching the river, a dog at her side. "Why does the water sound different?" she asked without turning. "It's nervous," said Seijun. "Soon strangers will walk its banks, and the river knows. Will we stop them?" "We'll try," he said, and that small word, try, was enough to calm the city more than any promise of victory. 2. Preparations. That night he slept on the northern wall, among soldiers eating hot rice by the fire. Through gaps in the planks he saw distant flickers, enemy campfires spreading like constellations. By morning, the city's rhythm had changed. Wells were covered to keep water clean. Granaries moved their sacks closer to the rear exits. Monks boiled herbs, weaving bandages. Women twisted ropes for slings and armour repairs. Seijun organised the defence into 4 circles. 1. The outer walls and moat. 2. The narrow streets with barricades. 3. The courtyards. 4. The temple square, the last refuge. He said only, Each line gives you one step back. As long as you have that step, you're still alive. At dusk an old fisherman came, bowing low, the smell of river on his sleeves. "My lord," he said, "for 40 years I've cast nets by the bend. The right bank is soft clay. If they bring heavy carts or horses, the earth will slide. I can loosen it more tonight." Sajan bowed in return. That was the kind of gift he valued most, knowledge. So under the moon, the fisherman's men worked silently, cutting roots, shifting stones, smoothing the ground as if nothing had changed, but everything had. Nothri, the first drumbeat. At dawn, fog rolled in thick as milk. Behind it, drums, low and steady like a second heartbeat. Then the fog split, revealing ranks of soldiers, spearmen in formation, gunners lighting fuses, banners rising like forest trunks. Sajan raised his hand. The wall fell silent. The first gun volley hit the wood, spraying splinters. Arrows answered, hissing downward. Steel clashed, drums pounded, smoke crawled across the moat. He walked the wall slowly, correcting stances with a calm tone. "Lower your elbow. Don't lean too far. Breathe steady." Wherever he paused, men seemed to last longer. By noon, the Akasaga troops tried crossing at the right bank, the Fisherman's Bend. When the first powder wagons reached midstream, Sajan lifted his sleeve. Hidden ropes jerked. The riverbank sagged like wet clay. Carts tilted. Horses screamed. Men tumbled into water. And for a heartbeat, silence bloomed. The sound of victory's first seed. It was small, but it took root. 4. The pause of war sieges never one long battle, but many short ones stitched by silence. At night, Hoshino kept few lights. The temple glowed faintly with incense smoke and herbs. A boy named Norio, the scribe's apprentice, wrote neat lists. Who needed bandages, who carried rice, who rested. His handwriting was tiny and determined. Older men smiled each time they saw it, and their hands stopped shaking. Sajan walked the city without a lantern. He knew streets by scent. Soy, coal, wet wood. In the smithy, Mitsuo listened to the cooling iron instead of striking it, hearing where cracks might hide. By the well, a woman named Mayu sorted jars briskly. "These to the temple. These to the wall. These will break soon. Use them first." "Are you afraid?" Sajan asked, though he already knew the answer. "For the first time," she said, smiling faintly. "But you walk calmly, so it must be possible." He nodded. People don't always need heroes, only proof that calm exists. That night, the enemy camp murmured with its own weariness. Flooded banks, few defenders, but they hold. Horses are tired, supplies thin. And someone added, "There's one man keeping that city upright. Take him, and it will fall." Bulls V. Smoke and Letters. On the third day, the drums changed rhythm. Carts rattled forward, bundles of reeds and pitch. Soon smoke rose at the moat, crawling upward, thick and black. A smoke assault. Sajan had prepared wet cloths and jars of vinegar. 2 boys with rattles climbed the watchtowers. Their sound guided defenders toward the densest fumes. Buckets sloshed, mats smothered flames. Smoke turned into mist. The city endured. But when the air cleared, everything smelled of tar, even the rice. That afternoon, a letter arrived from Lord Yoshino. "Our main army fights in the south. We send 1,000 spearmen and 300 archers. They will arrive in 6 days. Hold on. 6 days. Hope and despair folded into the same sentence. That evening Seijun showed the letter to all, hiding nothing. Then he said quietly, "We are not bound to die. We are bound to survive 6 days. That is different." The words were heavy, and they held. 6. The 5th day, the blind alley. On the 5th dawn, the enemy found a weakness. A servant, trembling for his family, had loosened ropes on a barricade in a narrow alley. 50 enemy soldiers slipped through before sunrise. The alarm rattle shrieked. Seijun was on the wall. He ran. 10 men followed without orders. A monk, a carpenter, a boy, a nameless man in blue. The alley was barely wide enough for 2 shoulders. Shadows flickered between beams of light. Villagers pulled children inside. The enemy advanced with small shields and short blades. Seijun shouted one word. "Konki!" Locals knew what he meant. Small drying racks for cloth, shaped like spiked combs. 2 runners dashed away, fetched the racks, and dropped them across the ground. The first invaders stumbled. Shields caught on the teeth. Knees buckled. The defenders stepped in rhythm, strike, half-step back, strike again. No shouts, no chaos, only rhythm. Soon the alley was silent again. Bodies lay tangled with broken wood. Seijun bowed to the lacquer maker's wife whose shop they had defended. "Your servant cut the ropes," he said. "We will not punish him. Tell him he'll carry water to the north wall tomorrow. Let him work where he understands what he protects." The woman said nothing. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with the strange quiet of respect. And the city, that night, breathed easier. Jepham, the 6th night. By the 6th night, the wind turned north again. Drums rolled closer, the enemy gathering for one final push before Yoshino's relief force arrived. Seijun did something he rarely allowed. He left the walls. He took 20 men, calm, chosen for silence. Their task was not battle, but disruption. They crept along the outer ditch under a thin moon. Wet grass bent under their feet. Ahead lay bundles of dry brush. Siege fuel. Seijun motioned forward. Men soaked the reeds with water, covered them with soil. Now they would smoke instead of burn. As they returned, voices drifted from the dark, 2 enemy sentries laughing, relieving themselves. Seijun could have killed them. Instead, he let them live. Noise wakes armies. They slipped back beneath the wall, unheard. The city exhaled, and Seijun knew dawn would come, but we must meet it alive. Dawn and the price. At dawn, the world erupted. Drums roared, horns bellowed, guns cracked. Smoke, fire, ladders, shouting, the final assault. But the damp reeds burned poorly, and the enemy stumbled through choking haze. Their rhythm broke. Still, near the old plane tree, one ladder found its place. 3 men climbed, then a 4th. Seijun was too far. He turned to young Haru, the archer beside him. "I see," said Haru, though Seijun had said nothing. The boy's fingers steadied. 4 arrows flew, shoulder, throat, chin, heart. The ladder emptied. Men below hesitated. 2 with poles shoved it away. Haru lowered his bow and stared at his hands, as if meeting them for the first time. Seijun touched his shoulder. "Drink," he said softly. By midday, through thinning smoke, new sounds reached them, horns from the south. The banners of Yoshino shimmered on the hills. Relief forces were near. The Akasaga troops wavered. Many began to withdraw, but their vanguard, desperate for one last glory, charged the north gate. The gate timbers groaned. Spears jabbed through cracks, hinges screamed. Seijun realized they will break through. He took a breath and did the unthinkable. He opened the gate himself. The defenders froze. The enemy froze too. He stepped out, without helmet, with sword in one hand, short spear in the other. For a heartbeat, even the drums forgot their beat. He did not run wildly. He moved like water, circling, cutting low, breaking formation. His task was not to win, but to buy time. The time it would take for the gate to be barred again behind him. He spun the spear to catch ankles, shields, knees. The sword worked short and close, carving seconds. Behind him, he heard the beam being dragged into place. He even heard Mayu set down her jar to help lift it. When the gate sealed, the wind at his back stopped, replaced by the weight of silence. He smiled, not to the enemy, but to the city, and two blades struck him, one through the shoulder, one through the side. He remained standing, astonished that he had done everything in time. Then he knelt, laying his sword gently on the earth. Inside, blood seeped beneath the gate. Mayu pressed a cloth to the gap. The cloth darkened, still warm. Outside, the enemy faltered. They saw Yoshino banners rising and lost heart. The siege broke. Hoshino stood. Janne after the storm. When the enemy withdrew, leaving ashes and broken wagons, Hoshino did not cheer. It breathed, long and slow. On the square, people stood in silence. Only the wind chimes spoke, ringing softly in the new sunlight. They carried Seijun into the temple. He was still alive, eyes fixed on the ceiling beams he had known since childhood. Plain wood, strong and warm. Between two beams, a young craftsman once carved a small ginkgo leaf. Just a whim. Seijun smiled at it now. "The city," he whispered. "Stands," said the monk, "and will stand." He nodded. He wanted to say more, about the fisherman, the boy, the woman, the meaning of calm, but words were unnecessary. Everything that mattered had already been done. They laid him facing east. Beside him stood Mayu's water jar, clear, trembling in the light. He watched it ripple once, like a wind chime touched by dawn, and was gone. So epilogue. The chimes of Hoshino. The city never raised a statue for him. He would not have wanted one. Instead, each autumn, when the wind changes, the people of Hoshino hang new chimes on their eaves. Clay, brass, bamboo. The wind weaves through them, turning the city into a soft orchestra of gratitude. Not a march, not a hymn, but a long whispering melody in which you can hear the carpenter, the monk, the boy with the rattle, the woman with the jar, the old fisherman, and the quiet steps of one man who opened a gate not for glory but for time. Children learn how to place conky racks during drills, in case of flood or fire. Fishermen teach where the river still undermines the bank. Monks keep a record of those who carried water, forged arrows, mixed vinegar, or simply endured. And at sunset, when the air smells of rice and soy, the city walks its wooden streets again. Boats sway, wind chimes sing, and if you listen closely you'll realize the silence of Hoshino isn't empty. It's filled with the footsteps of those who once chose to stay so that others could live. When the wind passes, it sounds as if the city itself is whispering thank you, in a language made only of bells and memory. Before the armour, Seijun's childhood in Hoshino 1. A house of thin walls, Seijun grew up in a small wooden house near the river stairs, where the walls were thin enough to let in the world. At dawn he woke to the slap of water against pilings, the creak of mooring ropes stretching, and the single groan of the footbridge as the fishmonger crossed with baskets still wet from the night. His mother liked to cook with the shutters open. Steam carried the warm smell of the rice onto the lane, and in return the lane carried back voices, neighbours trading greetings, calves coughing from a cart, a soft broom song on stone. "What do you hear?" his mother would ask, not "What did you learn?" And Seijun, still small enough to sit on the threshold with his knees hugged tight, would answer in pieces. "The river is fast. Old Kaji's cart is heavy. The fishmonger argues today, so the catch was scarce." She never corrected him. She only nodded, as if he had reported the weather. 2. The river's two languages. The first teacher was the river. In spring it splashed like laughter and slapped the steps. In late summer it moved with a low, mouth-closed murmur that meant heat and silt. An old fisherman, Shosuke, taught Seijun the river's two languages, what it said to the bank and what it said to the boats. To the bank, the old man explained, tapping stone with a pole, it complains or jokes. To the boats, it gives orders. When the channel narrowed, the water hissed in a straight line. Keep quick hands. When it lapped unevenly against both sides, it meant an undercurrent crosswise. Steer wider or you'll spin. Listen with your ankles, Shosuke told the boy as they stood barefoot on the lower steps. Water speaks through stone first. Seijun learned to feel tremors smaller than a heartbeat, the pebble roll before rain, the hollow thud that meant an upstream log, the tidy clatter that meant a crate adrift. Years later, walking a fortress wall, he would still pause when stone quivered beneath boot leather. 3. The man who gave the wind a voice. The city's second teacher was a blacksmith who loved sound. His name was Tadaya, and he had a habit. When a tool rang true, he smiled. When it rang dull, he frowned as if it had told a lie. One hot afternoon, Tadaya cooled a strip of hammered brass and cut it into a small tongue, then tied it to a bent ring and hung it from his eave. "Wind," he said, "ought to pay rent." The first wind chime in Hoshino spoke that evening, one bright syllable that hung and thinned and vanished. Seijun asked why a smith, of all people, would make something so delicate. "Steel talks loud because it must," Tadaya said, handing the boy a file. "But cities are built on quiet agreements. A little bell tells you when the air moves, even if your eyes are busy." Soon other houses copied the chime clay, bamboo, thin silver, and the wind began to keep the city's calendar. On long still days, even Tadaya's forge sounded softer, as if listening back. 4. The monk of the side gate. At the temple, a side gate opened onto a lane where weeds grew through the edge of paving stones. There lived Brother Kayan, a monk with a calm laugh and a bad knee. He swept the same square of ground every morning, not because it needed it, but because the act settled the day. Kayan taught Seijun silence by subtraction. He brought the boy into the hall when no one was praying and said, "Stand here, close your eyes, remove sounds one by one, leave only the one that remains of its own will." At first Seijun failed. He tried to push noises away. The crows, the floor's tiny size, a sandal outside. Kayan tapped his shoulder. "Don't push. Name them. Things leave when they are recognized." So the boy learned to name the rope swallow of the bell, thick with a fur edge, the paper screen rustle, dry leaf, the incense crackle, rice crust, his own breath, tide small. When he opened his eyes again, the world seemed arranged, not crowded. "Listening is not hunger," Kayan told him later over tea. It is housekeeping. 5. The map that no one drew. At 12, Seijun began to map Hoshino by ear. Not a map on paper, though he loved the look of maps, but a walking circuit he could travel in darkness and still know where he was. The market square had a braid of voices in mid-morning that unwound by noon. The dye yard beat cloth in a 4-stroke rhythm that slowed when the steam pipe whistled time for tea. The bathhouse let out a short chorus at sundown. A laugh, then a splash, then a thump of bucket. After that, the lane went shy. He marked the outliers, the boat that returned earlier than it should, the mill that ran late, the lone dog barking in even intervals, a tethered one. An outlier was a question. Questions meant change. Change was the beginning of trouble or opportunity. Long before he ever issued orders, the boy learned to be a keeper of questions. 6. The first fire. The first true alarm of Seijun's childhood came one winter night, when frost made roofs brittle and breath smoked in lantern light. A lacquerous shed burst with orange, and the wind leaned its shoulder to the flames. People ran with buckets, shouting, colliding. The city, usually careful, suddenly spun into panic. Seijun, barefoot, found himself beside Tadaya the smith. The man didn't run. He looked not at the flames, but at the lanes that fed them. "Here," Tadaya said, thrusting a bundle of little drying-rack's-toothed wooden frames used for cloth. "Lay them teeth up across the alley, slows the rush, makes men look at their feet." They did, and the alley stopped being a funnel and became a sieve. Buckets arrived without tripping. Embers died against damp cloth. The fire shrank back into its shed, and then into ember sulks under wet ash. Afterward, Seijun understood 2 things that would never leave him. First, a city is saved as much by small objects placed well as by great courage. Second, panic is a river that can be sent into channels. Years later, he would call those racks konki, and Hoshino would teach children to set them in drills the way others teach knots. 7. The Night Walkers. Around the same time, Brother Kyan told Seijun he was old enough to join the Night Walkers, a pair of wardens who crossed the district after midnight to check shutters, listen for trouble, and gossip with cats. They taught him the foot sense of the city, which boards complained when stepped on, which quarters dogs lied about danger, which wine shops sang too late when unfair debt was being pressed upstairs. He learned that a quiet house can be a bad sign too. Silence like a held breath. Silence that looks away. "Speak to the cobbles," one warden advised without irony. "Ask them who passed in a hurry." Seijun did, pressing a palm to the street after a scuffle, and felt heat in the grit where friction had dragged a heel. He could not tell the story, but he could tell its tempo. A city, he learned, is an instrument you can tune by attention. 8. The slow lesson of names. His father, a modest retainer with neat handwriting and a talent for introductions, taught him names. Of weeds, of knots, of the men who hauled grain, and the women who paid them honestly or not. "Remember names as you remember paths," his father said. "When trouble comes, you will need both. A city protects its own when it can call them." So Seijun learned the hierarchy of trust, who always returned a borrowed hoe, who gambled without cheating, who drank and then apologized in the morning, who never apologized and therefore could not be lent the second time. He also learned a harder truth. Some people needed to be moved, not punished, to where their weakness did less harm and their strength did more good. Later, in a siege, he would remember the servant who cut a rope out of fear and think, "Carry water where your fear can be useful." 9. The year of the short harvest. There came a short harvest when the river sulked, and the fields showed the ground between stalks. Prices rose, voices tightened, a thin anger walked the lanes. Sagen watched as the city adjusted its sounds. The mill ground only at dawn. The market officials clapped their boards half as often. The temple bell added a small, careful note to evening prayers. Even the wind chimes gained a faint, tremorless metal, more bone. Brother Kian sent Sagen to carry rice cards and ink to a far ward where the poor lived close. 3 families to a room. "Listen without fixing," the monk said. "You are not yet a man of decisions. Learn the cost before you learn command." He listened to mothers share broth with neighbours, to a drunk sing apologies outside a door that would not open, to a boy practising the flute wrong for an hour and then suddenly right for 5 notes in a row. He learned there that patience is not waiting. It is holding. 10. The Hill of Answers. On a hill above Hoshino stood a lone plane tree, and beside it a marker stone soft with lichen. Sagen climbed there when his head filled. From that height the city's voice became a single braid. The river shone like a blade laid flat. He asked the hill questions and waited. The answers did not come as words but as arrangements. He would notice a pattern he had missed. A street that had too many accidents on wet days. A shop that caused a bottleneck at noon because of how its bench jutted. Down he went to speak to the bench's owner, and the man moved it 2 hands inward, and a daily irritation simply disappeared. Heroics are clumsy, Sagen told himself without arrogance, but alignment, that is art. 11. The Gate Lesson. At 15 he received his first gate watch. He stood in lacquered plates that chafed, and a helmet that tilted unless he bit his jaw. For hours, nothing. Then 2 wagons arrived at once, then 3, then a wheel broke, and suddenly the gate was a cork in a bottle. The sergeant shouted, red with heat. Men shoved. The guard post filled with smoke from a cook fire that should have been snuffed. Sagen remembered the fire night and the racks. He grabbed 2 stall boards from a nearby vendor, laid them crosswise at the choke, and said nothing. The boards forced the flow into single file. The cork popped. People grumbled but moved. The smoke thinned. The sergeant stopped shouting because there was nothing left to shout at. Afterward, the sergeant clapped him on the back. "You didn't tell them to behave," he said. "You made the ground tell them." It was the first praise that tasted like responsibility. 12. The sound of wrong snow. One winter, a fine snow fell that made roofs creak in a way Sagen had never heard, a grainy, dragging creak like rice in a too-dry pot. He went to Tadeya the smith. "The snow sounds wrong," he said, embarrassed by his own vagueness. Tadeya stepped out, listened once, twice, then nodded. "Wet under, dry over," the smith judged. "It will slide in sheets. We must warn the lanes with steep eaves." They walked house to house, tapping and calling. "Draw your shutters. Tie your eaves lines." By midnight the city sounded different. Ropes whistling. Poles knocking ice. Laughter where roofs had been safely cleared. Only one lane ignored them, and in the morning a roof sloughed itself like a tired animal and crushed a tea stall. No one died, but everyone talked. Sagen learned that a city has seasons inside seasons, winter after the first thaw, war after the truce, quiet before the festival drum, and each has its fragile tasks. 13. The Lesson of the Unlucky Dog. He was 16 when he saw a boy throw a stone at a limping dog. The stone missed. The dog fled. The boy laughed for his friends. Sagen did not shout. He walked the boy to the fish dock and asked Shosuke for a job. "Have him carry baskets," Sagen said. "Heavy ones." The fisherman squinted. "What for?" "To learn weight." The boy carried for a week and came back slower, tired, polite. On the 8th day he set aside a sardine for the dog who still limped, and the friends laughed at him instead. He did not mind. He had learned the sound of disgrace and the sound of repair, and they were different. Later, leading men, Sagen would remember that correction must have texture hands, load rhythm, not just words. 14. The Night of the Lanterns. Every year, the Lantern Festival sent little lights down the river, like stars that had decided to try water. Sagen loved it as a child and worried it as a youth. The river in Festival ran too full of boats, too full of drink. He asked Brother Kian for permission to stand aside with a hook pole just in case, and the monk agreed. That night a lantern snagged in the reeds near the oil storehouse. A small thing, a small flame, a small drift. Sagen cut it loose with the pole and pressed it under with a paddle before anyone else noticed. He did not tell the story later. He decided the city owes sleep to those who prevent what never becomes news. 15. The Quiet Vow. On his 17th birthday, Sagen returned to the hill and the plane tree. Hoshino spread below eaves like folded fans, alleyways like brushstrokes, the river a polished line. He did not vow to be brave. He did not vow to win glory. He vowed something more domestic, almost embarrassingly plain, to keep the city arranged, to make sure doors opened the right way, and carts took turns, and chimes told of wind, not flame, and fear was given tasks instead of teeth. He would fail sometimes. He knew that. But a vow is not a prediction. It is a direction, a hand on a tiller, the weight of a foot on a rung, the sound of a bell you intend to hear again. The Valley of Small Sounds. Before Ren learned to hold a sword, he learned to hold silence. He was 7 years old when the wind began to speak to him. His home stood in a small valley between two cedar-covered hills. Every day began with the same gentle symphony, the soft sweep of brooms on temple stones, the drip of water from the well, and above it all, the bamboo grove whispering in green tongues. In the mornings, his father Taro ground ink for his calligraphy. The stone made a slow circular murmur, like a river learning to write. His mother Aya tended the garden, bending over herbs, her sleeves brushing the earth. Sometimes she hummed, not songs exactly, but fragments of breath that matched the wind. Ren sat on the threshold, small feet dangling above the step, a stick in his hand. He drew lines in dust, castles, bridges, swords, heroes, and every time the wind moved through the bamboo the drawings changed, fading and reappearing, as if the world were reminding him, everything moves, even dreams. 2. The Stranger. At dusk one autumn evening, when the air smelled of drying leaves and miso soup, a stranger came to their door. He was a samurai, or what remained of one. His armor was scratched, his sleeve torn, and his left hand bandaged. Taro hesitated at first. Times were uncertain, but Aya's kindness was faster than fear. The man bowed stiffly. "Just water," he said. He drank slowly, as if every swallow had to pass through pain. After eating, he sat near the hearth in silence. Ren hid behind the screen, peeking through a crack. The samurai's face was not fierce. It was tired, like a mountain after rain. On his lap rested his sword, still sheathed, polished by care though the rest of him was worn. Late that night, while his parents slept, Ren woke again. Through the open door he saw the samurai in the yard under moonlight. The man moved, slowly, beautifully, through a pattern of gestures. Each step, Each turn of the wrist was so quiet that the night air seemed to lean closer to see. Ren thought, he is not fighting anyone. The man's shadow swayed with him, a second soul. At the end, the samurai held still for a long moment, then bowed to no one in particular, perhaps to the air itself. The boy's heart filled with something vast and wordless. He didn't yet know it was called reverence. 3. The morning after. At dawn, the traveller prepared to leave. His hand trembled slightly as he tied his sword to his belt. Ren, barefoot, followed him to the path. "Where are you going?" Ren asked. The man smiled without looking down. "To carry my name a little farther." He reached into his sleeve and took out a thin piece of bamboo, whittled smooth at both ends. "This grew near your home," he said. "Keep it. Bamboo bends. Remember that." Ren nodded, though he didn't yet understand. He watched until the man became a dot among the hills, a line of silver moving toward somewhere unknown. That day, Ren decided that someday he too would walk like that. Steady, quiet, carrying something invisible but important. 4. The wooden sword. A few days later, a storm rolled in. Wind raced through the valley, making the bamboo clatter like bones. Ren stood in the rain, gripping his little piece of bamboo. When it cracked in his hands, he didn't cry. Instead, he gathered fallen branches and under the porch began carving. He made his first wooden sword, crooked, uneven, far too heavy. But when he lifted it, something in his chest straightened. He swung it clumsily, copying the stranger's movements. The rain answered with applause on the roof. From that day, Ren practiced whenever he could, behind the house, in the grove, even in his dreams. The blade hummed through the air, making small mistakes sound like lessons. Sometimes he fell, sometimes he laughed, sometimes he simply stood listening to the world between each swing. Taro watched him once from the veranda. "My son," he said gently. "A brush teaches patience faster than a sword." Ren looked up, eyes shining. "Then I'll learn both," he replied. His father smiled. "Then the world will have no secrets from you." 5. The lessons of the bamboo. By the time Ren turned 8, he could tell which stalks of bamboo were ready to split by sound alone. If the tone was high and thin, the stalk was still green. If it rang low and hollow, the fibres had dried and would make good handles for tools or pipes. He spent hours sitting in the grove, pressing his ear against the stems, tapping them softly. Once his mother found him there at twilight and asked what he was doing. "I'm waiting for them to tell me where they came from," he said simply. Aya laughed quietly. "And what did they say?" "That they used to be the wind." She didn't correct him. Instead she whispered, "Then you must be their echo." That night, the wind through bamboo and Ren's breathing became one rhythm. Something within him began to settle into that quiet pattern, a discipline without rules. 6. The calligrapher's brush Ren's father had a patient soul. He wrote scriptures for temples and letters for villagers who couldn't read. His hands were strong but never hurried. One evening Ren asked him why he worked so slowly. Taro answered, "Because the world hurries enough. If I rush, the words forget their meaning." Ren thought about that as he watched ink drip from the brush's tip, forming tiny black circles on white paper, like ripples in still water. "Can a sword write?" Ren asked suddenly. Taro chuckled. "No, but a hand that can write well may also hold a sword without trembling." Wren began practicing calligraphy beside him. Each character became a strike. Brush down, breathe, lift, release. He didn't know it then, but he was already learning the kata of stillness. 7. The Sparrow and the Sword. One morning, Wren noticed a sparrow caught in a snare near the garden fence. Its wing fluttered frantically. Its eyes were round with panic. He rushed to free it, but the knot was tight. He pulled harder, too hard, and the bird fell still. Wren sat there, tears cutting clean lines down his dusty face. That night he buried the sparrow under the bamboo, marking the grave with a small stone. His mother came to him with a lantern. "You did not mean harm," she said softly. "But remember, care requires gentleness, not speed." From that day, Wren practiced slower. When he swung his wooden sword, he thought of breath, not power. He realized that sometimes the difference between life and harm was the space of a heartbeat. 8. The Firefly's Lesson. In summer, the fields of Hoshino glowed with fireflies. Children ran among them, laughing, catching their tiny lanterns in their hands. Wren tried too, but each time he caught one its light went dark. He grew frustrated, standing alone by the river. Then he noticed something. When he stopped chasing, when he simply stood still, the fireflies came to him, landing on his shoulders, his wrists, his wooden sword. He whispered, "So that's the secret. Don't chase light. Become calm enough for it to stay." He didn't yet realize that he had just learned the essence of mastery. The river's gift. One afternoon, after a long rain, Wren followed the swollen stream down the valley. He found the remains of an old bridge, half washed away. On one beam lay something half buried in mud, the broken hilt of a real sword. He pulled it out, cleaned it on his sleeve, and held it up. The metal was dull and rusted, but in it he saw his reflection, blurred, uncertain, but his. He took it home and showed his father. Taro frowned, then sighed. "Every boy finds a mirror one day," he said. "If you can look into it without losing your own shape, you may keep it." Wren placed the hilt beside his bed. At night the moonlight caught its edge, and the room filled with a faint silver line, the quiet promise of a future not yet written. 10. The Dream of the Traveller. That winter, Wren dreamed of the wounded samurai. He stood again in the moonlit yard, moving through his invisible dance. But this time, when the man finished, he turned and looked at Wren. "Do you hear it now?" he asked. Wren listened. In the dream, the wind through bamboo sounded like footsteps, and footsteps like breathing. "Yes," Wren said, "I hear it." The samurai nodded once. "Then you are already walking." Wren woke before dawn. He went outside, snow under his feet, and bowed toward the grove. The air was cold and still, but in that silence, he could feel the world breathing with him. 11. The First Oath. The next morning, Wren took his wooden sword, his father's old writing brush, and the piece of bamboo the traveller had given him. He set them in a row on the porch, then knelt. He touched his forehead to the wood. "I don't want to hurt," he whispered. "I want to understand." The words drifted into the air and froze there like frost. Above him, a single stalk of bamboo bent in the wind and dropped a flake of snow onto his hand, light as a blessing. He smiled. The path was still long, but the first step had already happened, not in his feet, but in his heart. The shape of morning wren woke before the rooster's call. The stars were still fading, and mist curled between the bamboo stalks like pale smoke from sleeping chimneys. He held his wooden sword against his shoulder and stepped quietly onto the dew-damp earth. The world was not yet awake, only the soft pulse of insects and the distant drip of water from the roof's edge. He loved this hour because it belonged to no one. It was the time between night and day when every sound seemed sacred, even the creak of his own breath. He swung the sword slowly, letting the blade carve lines into air. Each motion ended in stillness. He was not fighting an enemy, he was learning to hear himself. When the first light touched the hills, Ren bowed toward the grove. The bamboo did not answer, but the morning wind bent it in return. A quiet gesture, a lesson returned. 2. The Old Calligrapher's Rule. After breakfast, Ren helped his father with paper making. They soaked mulberry bark, pounded it with wooden mallets, and pressed the pulp through screens. It was slow, repetitive work, and Taro's rule was simple. No speech while the water runs. At first, Ren found it boring. He wanted to talk, to ask questions, to tell his father how well his morning practice had gone. But silence, once accepted, revealed its own patterns. He began to notice the rhythm of dripping water, the same rhythm as breath when he swung the sword. At noon, when they finished, Taro looked at him and said, "The hand that can pour water without spilling is ready to hold anything, even steel." Ren nodded, though his arms ached. He realized that training was not only in the grove, it was in every task done without haste. 3. The River Duel. A few days later, Ren and other village boys gathered by the riverbank. They often played duels with bamboo poles, pretending to be warriors. Ren's friend Yori shouted, "Let's see who's the strongest." They fought clumsily, laughter ringing through the valley. Ren lost the first match, then the second. The others mocked him. "Too slow, bamboo listener." Ren grinned. "The bamboo listens better than any of you." But inside, he felt a sting. That evening he returned alone. He stood in the same place and watched the river move, bright ribbons of water twisting around stones. He realized that the river never rushed, yet it always won. He stepped into the shallows, letting the current tug at his feet. He practiced there until his legs trembled, learning to balance against what moved beneath him. That night, he dreamed that he was part of the river, not fighting it, but moving with its pulse. 4. The Lesson of Weight. Ren grew stronger that year, but one morning when he tried to lift a real practice sword at the shrine, he almost dropped it. Its iron blade pulled at his arms like gravity itself. The head monk, who was sweeping the courtyard, smiled at the sight. "Do not fight its weight," he said. "Respect it. Let it remind you of what it can do." Ren bowed and tried again, slower this time. He could feel the difference, not just in his muscles, but in his awareness. Every ounce of metal asked for responsibility. When he returned home, he carved heavier wooden swords until his arms shook. But the shaking, he realized, was not failure. It was proof that he had found the edge of his effort. 5. Rain practice. Summer brought long rains, the fields turned to mirrors, and frogs ruled the nights. Ren did not stop training. He practiced in the courtyard as the rain poured down, soaking his hair and clothes. The wooden sword grew heavier with water, each swing pulling harder. But something about the rain made him feel free, as if the sky itself were training beside him. When he grew tired, he stood still and listened. The drops striking the ground sounded like thousands of tiny swords being drawn and sheathed. He whispered to himself, "Even rain has rhythm. Even rain fights and rests. His mother watched from the doorway, shaking her head but smiling. "He'll catch a cold," she told Taro, but Taro only said, "He's learning patience. Sometimes the fever of effort cures a colder heart." 6. The Sparrow Returns. By autumn, the seasons began to turn again. One morning, Wren found a sparrow perched on the grave he had made the year before. It pecked the small stone and then fluttered to his shoulder, chirping softly. Wren froze. The tiny weight felt like forgiveness. He whispered, "You came back." The bird hopped onto his sword's hilt and then flew into the sky. "Later," he told his mother. Aya only nodded. When we act with kindness, even mistakes find their way home. That night, Wren lay awake thinking that maybe the world was always speaking, only most people had forgotten how to listen. 7. The night fire that winter was harsh. Snow piled high on roofs and the air cracked with cold. One night a shout tore through the valley, a fire at the blacksmith's house. Wren and his father rushed out with buckets. Flames licked the sky. Villagers formed a line, passing water from the river, but the fire roared louder than their cries. Wren saw a child trapped inside. Without thinking, he ran through the smoke. The heat clawed at his face, his lungs burned, but he found the girl under a fallen beam. He dragged her out just as the roof collapsed behind him. When it was over, his hands were blistered, his eyebrows singed. The girl's mother wept in gratitude. Wren said nothing. He only sat by the river afterward, trembling. His father knelt beside him. "You were brave," he said, "but next time, breathe before you act. Courage without breath turns to recklessness." Wren nodded slowly, the words sinking into his bones. Courage was not rushing into fire. It was knowing when stillness burned brighter. 8. The Stranger's Return. In early spring, Wren saw a familiar figure walking along the village road. The wounded samurai from years before. His armour was repaired now, though the left hand still bore scars. He stopped at their gate, recognizing Taro's house. Wren's heart raced. He ran forward and bowed deeply. "Do you remember me?" he asked. The man smiled. "The boy with the bamboo." They spoke that evening by the hearth. The samurai's name was Kenshiro, and he had once served a lord who was now gone, lost in endless wars between provinces. "I have no master now," he said quietly, "only the path." Wren asked if he still trained every day. Kenshiro nodded. "A blade dulls if it cuts too much. It sharpens when it moves in peace." Before leaving the next morning, he gave Wren a small worn cloth wrapped around an object. Inside was a single training coin, used by warriors to strengthen their grip. "It is not much," Kenshiro said, "but it will remind you that even small circles make strong hands." Wren bowed, holding the coin like a relic. As the samurai disappeared down the road, the boy whispered, "Then I'll keep walking too." 9. The First Test. By his 12th year, Wren had grown tall and quiet. Other boys now came to him for sparring practice. He was patient, rarely boasting, but they saw the steadiness in his movements and grew to respect him. One day, a traveller passing through challenged anyone in the village to a mock duel for entertainment. He was skilled, too skilled for games. When Wren stepped forward, his father frowned, but said nothing. They fought in the open square. The traveller's strikes were sharp and fast. Wren barely kept up, his arms aching, his mind scattering. Then, suddenly, he heard something. the bamboo's rhythm in his memory, the sound of rain, the drip of paper water, the pause between breaths. He stopped blocking wildly and began to move with the other man's timing. He wasn't faster, only calmer. When the traveller overreached, Ren stepped aside and tapped his chest lightly. The crowd gasped. The duel was done. The traveller laughed, bowing. "Where did you learn that?" Ren answered. "From everything that isn't fighting." The man smiled, left a single coin at Ren's feet, and walked away. Taro picked it up and handed it to his son. "Keep it," he said. "Now you have 2 reminders of patience." "10. The river again." That evening, Ren returned to the river. He placed the 2 coins on a flat stone and watched the current reflect their gleam. He realized how much he had changed, from the boy who broke bamboo in eagerness to someone who could wait for the right moment to move. He whispered to the river, "Thank you for being my teacher." The current answered by carrying 1 coin away, not as a theft, but as a gift returned to time. Ren smiled. "Then I'll keep the other one to remember you." The valley slept under the gentle hush of wind. In his heart, Ren felt both the weight of his sword and the lightness of the bamboo. He understood at last. Strength was not in how hard he struck, but in how softly he could hold what mattered. The stranger with 1 eye. The summer came heavy that year. The air shimmered with heat, and the sound of cicadas filled the valley like the crackle of invisible fire. One morning, as the villagers gathered near the shrine to repair a broken roof beam, a figure appeared at the edge of the road. A man with a straw hat pulled low, leaning on a walking staff. He moved slowly, deliberately, yet with balance so precise it seemed rehearsed. When he lifted his head, the villagers saw that one of his eyes was clouded white, the other sharp as a falcon's. A scar cut across his brow, vanishing into his grey hair. Ren watched as the stranger bowed before the shrine. "I am Moro, a traveller," the man said. "I carry no sword, only teaching. I seek a place to rest and share what I have learned." The headman agreed, offering him shelter in the temple house. In the days that followed, the villagers discovered that though the man's body was old, his movements were those of a stream, effortless, precise, alive. 2. The teacher without a sword. Ren visited Moro the next morning, bringing rice and tea. The old man thanked him and gestured to a mat by the open door. "Sit. You have the eyes of someone listening for something." Ren blushed. "I only practice a little sword play," Moro smiled faintly. "Then you are already half a student." He took Ren's wooden sword and balanced it across 2 fingers. "Too heavy in the hilt," he said. "You fight against your own tool." Ren frowned. "But strength is a guest. It comes and goes. Balance builds the house." He stood, asked Ren to strike at him. Ren hesitated, then swung. Moro moved only a step aside, his staff barely touching Ren's wrist. The sword dropped into the dirt. Ren bowed quickly. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize to me," Moro said, smiling. "Apologize to your impatience." The words settled in Ren's chest like stones sinking into deep water. 3. The breath before the strike. Over the next weeks, Moro began teaching the village boys. He carried no sword, only a bamboo staff polished smooth by years of touch. His lessons were unlike anything Ren had imagined. He never shouted, never struck hard. He made them stand still for long minutes, eyes closed, feeling the air move around them. He told them to count the sounds of the world, The rustle of insects, the creak of the shrine gate, the far-off hammer of a carpenter. "Before you fight," he said, "you must learn to hear what the world is already saying. When you breathe, do not try to control it. Let it tell you who you are in this moment." At first, the boys giggled, but Ren listened seriously. He realized that the pause before a movement had more meaning than the swing itself, that the stillness between breaths carried power no weapon could match. 4. The Test of Falling Leaves. One day, as autumn neared, Morrow gathered the students in the bamboo grove. He told them to draw a circle in the dirt and stand inside it. "Do not leave your circle," he said. "Do not strike unless you must." Then he tossed handfuls of dry leaves into the air. They drifted, twisting, falling in soft spirals. "Defend yourself," Morrow said. The boys flailed wildly, cutting at the leaves. Only Ren stood still, watching. He saw that each leaf had its own path, some slow, some quick. He began to move gently, swiping only at those that came directly toward him. When the last leaf fell, Morrow clapped once. "The lesson," he said, "is not about speed. It is about listening. If you swing at every leaf, you exhaust your life before it reaches the ground." That night Ren couldn't sleep. He kept seeing the leaves turning, realizing they were like people, each following their own fall. He whispered to himself, "Then I must learn when to move and when to let others fall." 5. The Lesson of Shadows. As winter approached, the lessons grew quieter. Morrow no longer spoke during practice. He would sit on a stone, eyes closed, while Ren and the others trained among long shadows. One evening Ren asked him, "Sensei, how can you fight with only a stick?" Morrow tapped his staff on the ground. "This is not a stick. It is a shadow of a sword. When a man fears death, even a shadow can defeat him." Ren pondered that for days. He began to see the world differently, the way light and dark shifted across faces, the way silence filled space after words. When he practiced alone, he imagined the sword not as a weapon but as a line between two breaths, the breath of fear and the breath of peace. 6. The Fox on the Path 1. Early morning, Ren accompanied Morrow to gather herbs in the forest. Mist hung low, and every sound was softened by dew. Halfway up the path they saw a fox, small, golden, and still. It watched them without fear. Ren reached for a stone. Morrow touched his wrist. "Why throw? It might steal food." The old man shook his head. "It is already full. Look at its belly." Indeed, the fox's sides were round, peaceful. It turned and slipped into the trees soundless. Morrow said, "Every creature teaches you something. If you act before you see, you lose what is given." Ren nodded. He realized then that Morrow's lessons were not about swords at all. They were about seeing without haste. 7. The Day of Silence. As snow began to fall, the village held its yearly festival to honor ancestors. Drums echoed, bells rang, children shouted. Only Morrow remained apart, meditating under the shrine's eaves. Ren approached him with a cup of sake. "Sensei," he said, "why don't you celebrate?" Morrow smiled gently. "I am celebrating, just quietly." He pointed to the snowflakes melting on his sleeve. "Each one dies singing a song too small for ears. You hear it only when you are still." Ren sat beside him. The music of the festival became distant, almost like wind through distant pines. He closed his eyes. For the first time he understood what it meant to listen until the world disappeared. That night, He dreamt of snow falling endlessly, each flake a heartbeat, each heartbeat a whisper. 8. The Broken Vase. In spring, a boy named Daiki, one of Ren's training partners, accidentally broke a vase belonging to the temple. It had belonged to the head monk's teacher. Fearful of punishment, Daiki lied, blaming Ren. When the monk questioned him, Ren said nothing. He could have defended himself, but something in Moro's earlier words stopped him. Only what is still can see what moves. He waited. Days passed. The others avoided him. Finally, Daiki came to him one evening weeping. "I couldn't carry the lie," he said. "I told the truth." Ren smiled faintly. "Then you're freer than yesterday." When Moro heard what had happened, he nodded. "People believe silence is weakness," he said. "But silence sharpens truth. Sometimes you win not by speaking, but by standing still long enough for falsehood to tire itself." 9. The Lesson of Water and Stone. Moro's final lesson came as the rains returned. He led Ren and the others to the river. He pointed to a stone in midstream, smoothed by years of current. "This stone never moves," Moro said, "yet the river bows to it every day." He asked them to place their palms on the water's surface. Feel how it pushes, then yields. That is how you must be. Ren watched the droplets run down his arm. He thought of the sparrow, the leaves, the snow, the fox, the silence, all flowing into one truth. He realized the sword was not for fighting at all. It was a tool for understanding how to stop fighting everything that could not be changed. 10. The Farewell. When the next dawn came, the villagers found that Moro had gone. His mat was neatly rolled, his staff gone, his sandals missing from the step. Only a small pouch remained, tied with twine. Ren opened it and found a smooth riverstone inside. On it, in careful brush strokes, was a single word: listen. Ren held it for a long time, feeling the weight of silence it carried. He knew that Moro's lessons were not finished. They would live on in the rhythm of his steps, in the pause before each breath. That evening he placed the stone beside the bamboo the samurai had given him years ago. 2 gifts from 2 teachers, one of the sword, one of silence. He bowed to both. Outside the wind stirred, passing through the valley like an invisible hand across a stringed instrument. The sound was not loud, but Ren could hear it perfectly. It was the same voice he had been following all his life, now clearer than ever. When the wind changed. After Sensei Moro's departure, the valley felt larger. The air seemed to echo longer between the hills, and every whisper of bamboo carried his memory. Ren missed the teacher's voice, but he also sensed that the silence Moro left behind was part of the lesson. Spring wind came earlier that year. It tugged at the rice seedlings, rattled shutters, hummed in the wells. Ren began to train outdoors again, and he noticed something new. The wind corrected him. When he struck too hard, the gust caught his sleeve. When he moved too slowly, it slipped past him, mocking his hesitation. He realized that the air itself was testing him. Invisible, tireless, and always honest. 2. The Old Carpenter. One afternoon, Ren helped an old carpenter repair the bridge over the stream. The man, Saji, was small and bent, his hands calloused into maps. He showed Ren how to set beams against the direction of wind and water so the bridge would breathe instead of break. "The wind never stops," Saji said, tightening a rope. "You can't fight it. You must give it something to play with. Wren thought of his training and smiled. When the bridge was done, it sang faintly as the breeze passed through its joints, a deep wooden hum like a flute hidden under the road. "That," Saji said, "is the sound of strength that learned to bend." Wren carried that sound with him when he practiced that night. Every swing of his sword began to feel like part of a larger music. 3. Sparring with the errant practice became quieter. He stopped counting strokes or seeking speed. Instead, he let the wind set the tempo. When it blew from the north, he cut short and crisp. When it turned warm from the south, his movements lengthened, drifting like silk. Children sometimes stopped to watch him. They said he looked like he was dancing with someone no one else could see. Wren didn't correct them. He was dancing with the oldest partner in the world. 4. The River Duel. One morning the river swelled from rain, wide and restless. Wren stepped into the shallows with a bamboo staff instead of his sword. He began to move through his forms, but the current resisted each step. Water slapped against his legs, pulled at his balance, laughed at his effort. Frustrated, he struck harder and fell. Cold rushed into his mouth and nose. He crawled back to the bank, gasping. Then he remembered Moro's words. "Feel how it pushes, then yields." Wren stood again, calmer. This time he let the current guide his footwork. He didn't fight to stay upright. He drifted, stepping where the water wanted him to go. When he struck, the staff sliced cleanly through the surface, sending up silver arcs that caught the morning light. When he finally stopped, he was smiling, soaked but certain. The river had taught him the same truth as the wind. Control begins with surrender. 5. The Laughing Farmers. Later that day, some farmers saw him practicing and laughed kindly. "Are you training to fight fish, Wren?" one joked. Wren bowed. "No, only to stop fighting the river." They laughed louder, but one of them, an older woman, said quietly, "That's harder than fighting fish." Wren realized that every person in the valley carried their own wisdom. The potter who listened to clay, the farmer who read the sky, the weaver who knew when a thread wanted to break. All of them were warriors in their own small battles against haste. He began visiting them, asking questions not about combat but about timing. Each trade had its rhythm. Each rhythm belonged to the same unseen song. By listening, Wren's sword became part of that harmony. 6. The Night of the Typhoon. Late in the summer, the sky turned heavy and green. Birds vanished. The old men at the sack shop said the wind smelled of the sea. A storm was coming. When it arrived, it came like a living thing. Thunder cracked over the valley. Bamboo bent nearly to the ground. Wren and his family barred windows and tied the roof beams with rope. Through the roar, Wren could hear the grove crying like 1,000 flutes at once. In the middle of the night, he saw one stalk snap. Without thinking, he ran outside. Rain struck his face like gravel. He crouched, holding up another stalk to keep it from breaking, though he knew it was useless. His father shouted for him to come back, but Wren stayed until the gust passed. When it did, the stalk straightened, bruised but alive. He whispered, "You endured." And for the first time he understood that courage sometimes means standing beside what can't be saved and helping it suffer less. 7. After the storm morning came like forgiveness. The valley steamed, roofs glistened, the river carried whole trees away toward the sea. Wren walked the path through the bamboo grove. Many stalks were broken, lying across one another in silence. He He sat among them for a long time. He thought of Sensei Moro, of the fox of the falling leaves. All those lessons returned like footprints revealed after the flood. When he rose, he picked up one of the fallen stalks. It was split cleanly but not shattered. He cut a section from it, polished it smooth, and strung it with a thread. It became a flute, a new voice born from ruin. That evening he played a slow tune by the river. The sound was thin, trembling, yet somehow whole. Even the frogs paused. The wind carried the melody down the valley, soft as prayer. 8. The Traveller's Return. Weeks later, another traveller came through the village. Not a warrior, but a monk carrying a begging bowl. He stopped when he heard Ren's flute. "You play like someone who has spoken with storms," he said. Ren bowed. "Only listen to them." The monk smiled. "Then you are ahead of most monks I know." He handed Ren a small charm carved from driftwood, a spiral. Wind becomes water, water becomes wood, wood becomes fire, fire becomes ash, and ash feeds the wind again. Remember the circle. Ren kept the charm and tied it around the hilt of his wooden sword. It swung lightly when he practiced, ticking like a heartbeat. 9. The lesson of Breath Autumn returned, and with it quiet days. Ren's father fell ill for a time, and Ren took over his chores, grinding ink, copying scrolls, fetching water. While he worked, he began to notice that his breath changed with every task. When he hurried, the brush trembled. When he exhaled slowly, the lines became beautiful. He realized that sword and brush shared the same secret. Neither obeys the hand, only the breath. So he practiced breathing while writing, then breathing while striking until both became one act. His movements grew softer, deeper, truer. Even his mother noticed. "You move like the wind forgot it was angry," she said. So 10. The Whisper of the Grove. One evening Ren returned to the grove at twilight. The air was still, the world holding its breath before night. He placed his sword before him and bowed. "Sensei Moro," he said quietly, "if you can hear me, I understand now. The sword is not for killing or for winning. It is a way to listen to the wind more clearly." A breeze rose from nowhere, passing through the grove. The bamboo swayed, not breaking, not resisting, just moving as one body. For a moment every leaf shone with the last light of day, and the sound was like many voices murmuring the same word. Ren smiled. He didn't need to know whether it was the wind or his teacher answering. Either way, the message was the same. Keep listening. The summer that forgot to rain. It began with small silences. First the frogs stopped singing, then the water wheel at the mill turned slower, its creak fading to a sigh. By midsummer, the river ran shallow enough to show its stones like ribs. The fields cracked, the sky refused its duties, and the wind carried dust instead of comfort. Ren's mother said the earth was tired. His father said perhaps the gods were. By autumn, it was clear there would not be enough. Rice stores dwindled. Neighbours began trading heirlooms for grain. The shrine bell, once rung for celebration, sounded only for prayer. Ren had never known hunger that spoke with teeth. At first it was only a dull ache, but soon it became a voice, whispering of unfairness, of blame, of fear. 2. The Storehouse Watch. The headman ordered the younger men to guard the village storehouse. At night, Ren stood among them, his wooden sword at his side. The building smelled of dry straw and old hopes. The moonlight drew long silver lines across the walls. Every creak felt like a question. Would you strike a man for stealing food? On the third night, the question found its answer. 2 shadows appeared near the fence, thin figures moving too slowly to be dangerous. Wren stepped forward. "Stop!" he called. The figures froze. One dropped a basket. When Wren approached, he saw it was a man and a woman, both gaunt, their eyes wide, not with malice but with desperation. "Please," the man said, voice cracked dry. "Our child is sick. Just a handful." Wren's hands trembled. He thought of his father's words about breath, about patience. He lowered his sword. "Take what you need," he said softly, "but go quickly." They bowed again and again, tears mixing with dust, and vanished into the dark. 3. The accusation. In the morning, the storehouse keeper found the missing rice and sounded the alarm. Wren did not lie. He stood before the headman and said plainly, "I let them go," the crowd murmured. "Fool," one man shouted, "kindness will starve us all." The headman's face hardened. "You disobeyed your duty. You will repay what was lost with work. No sleep tonight. Guard again." Wren bowed. "I will." That night, as he stood alone by the storehouse, the moon was gone. Only the wind spoke, moving through the grass like a slow question. Was he wrong? He thought of the woman's hands, shaking as she held her child's bowl. He whispered to the darkness, "If mercy is wrong, may the gods correct me." No answer came, only the rustle of distant bamboo, the sound of someone who understood but would not interrupt. 4. The calligrapher's hands. The next day, Wren's father called him inside. Taro's hands had grown thin, his calligraphy slower. He said, "A brush cannot fill an empty belly, but it can feed the mind that still believes in order." He gave Wren a scroll covered in quiet words. Even drought obeys a rhythm. After silence, water returns. "Keep this with you," Taro said. "When you begin to hate what you cannot change, read it aloud." Wren carried it folded in his sleeve from that day on. Sometimes he didn't even open it. It was enough to feel the paper's pulse, like a soft heartbeat of patience. 5. The Thief's Shadow. Weeks later, a new rumour spread that armed thieves from the hills had begun raiding villages. The men built barricades. Wren helped dig the ditches, though his hands bled. One night, a small group appeared. 3 men with torches, faces hidden, moving toward the storehouse. This time there was no mistaking intent. Wren stepped out into their light. "Turn back," he said. One laughed. "A boy with a stick." They rushed him. He deflected the first blow, sidestepped the second, remembering the river's lessons. He struck the third man's arm, not hard enough to break, only to disarm. But the fourth, whom he hadn't seen, struck him from behind. Pain flashed. His wooden sword fell. The thieves grabbed sacks and ran. Wren stumbled after them, dizzy, hearing the pounding of his own heart louder than the footsteps. Then suddenly they stopped. A voice shouted from the darkness, "Enough!" It was the same man who had once begged for food. He stood between Wren and the others, holding up his hands. "He spared us when we were starving," he said. "We will not repay mercy with fire." The others hesitated, then dropped their sacks and fled into the trees. Wren sat in the dirt, stunned. The man bowed once. Kindness returns if you live long enough to see it. Then he too disappeared. 6. The rice that walked back in the morning. the villagers found 2 sacks of rice neatly placed before the gate. No footprints led to them. Some said it was ghosts. Wren said nothing. He simply smiled. The headman approached him quietly. "You were right," he admitted. "But rightness doesn't always fill bowls." "No," Wren said, "but it keeps hands from turning into claws." From that day, the headman asked Wren's advice before every decision, and though Wren still considered himself a student, others began to see in him the calm weight of leadership. 7. The Day of the Rain. At last, clouds returned. The first drops fell like forgotten blessings. People ran outside, laughing, holding bowls, jars, even their open palms. Wren lifted his face and let the water run down his cheeks like forgiveness. The rain lasted 3 days. The river swelled, the fields darkened with life, and the valley exhaled. Children played in puddles that reflected the sky. That night Wren visited the shrine. He placed a bowl of water on the altar instead of rice. "For what we learn when we are hungry," he whispered, "thank you." 8. Sensei Moro's Shadow. During that rain, Wren dreamed again of Sensei Moro. The old man stood by the same river, his staff planted in the mud. "Did you learn?" he asked. Wren bowed. "I learned that mercy is heavier than steel," Moro smiled. "Then you have lifted what most warriors drop." When Wren woke, the rain had stopped. Sunlight filled the room. He touched the stone Moro had left him, smooth, silent, and knew the dream had been real in all the ways that mattered. 9. The Green Season. By the next planting season, the valley was alive again. The rice grew high, thick, and eager. Laughter returned to the marketplace. Yet something in Wren had changed permanently. He no longer sought strength for himself. When he trained now, he imagined protecting quiet, not victory, not fame. Just the fragile peace that allowed ordinary lives to unfold. One evening his mother said, "You've grown into your silence, Wren. It suits you." He laughed softly. "Then I hope I never outgrow it." 10. The Wind Carries the Memory. On the anniversary of the famine, Wren climbed the hill above the village. From there he could see the fields, the river, the rooftop still patched with last year's straw. He closed his eyes and listened. The wind carried the sound of hammers, the cry of a baby, the creak of boats on water. Each sound was small, but together they made something sacred, proof that life had survived. Wren whispered to the valley, "We are still here." And in the answering hush, he thought he heard the bamboo bowing back in acknowledgement. When the air turned red, autumn came early that year. The leaves browned before they burned gold. The wind, once a friend, carried smoke from the northern hills. Rumours arrived before soldiers did. A band of mountain men, desperate and armed, were moving toward the valley. At first, no one believed it. The harvest had just begun. Carts rattled along the roads, and laughter returned after years of want. But the smell of ash in the mornings was unmistakable. Something unseen was walking closer. Wren stood on the hill above Hoshino and watched the horizon. The sky itself seemed to bleed where the sun touched the ridges. He remembered Moro's words. Before a storm, even the bamboo holds its breath. The valley was holding its breath now. 2. The Meeting of Voices. The headman called a council. Farmers, craftsmen, even the oldest women came, sitting in a half-circle under the cedar trees. Wren listened as fear argued with pride. "We must flee," said one. "No," said another, "we have survived famine. We can survive thieves." When his turn came, Wren spoke quietly. "We have no soldiers," he said, "but we have knowledge. We know every bend of the river, every stone of the road. If we move like the valley moves, we can protect it." They agreed to fortify the bridge and the storehouse. Wren took charge, not as a lord, but as one who had already proven calm under pressure. He refused the title of commander. "Call me what I am," he said, "a listener who acts." 3. The Night of Waiting. 3 nights later, the hills glowed faintly with firelight. Wren sent children and the old to the shrine on higher ground. He and the men stayed below, armed with farming tools, staves, and what few blades they owned. It was a strange kind of silence, one that hummed with held breath and heartbeat. Wren sat near the bridge, feeling the wind shift. He realized how small his own body was in the face of what approached, and yet he felt no fear, only clarity. He whispered to himself, "When the storm comes, be the stone that teaches the water its shape." 4. The First Shout. The bandits arrived just before dawn. They moved fast, shadows on shadows, their torches flaring against the fog. Wren's heart counted each step. When the first shout rang out, it was not of anger, but of panic. Someone struck too early. Chaos rippled like fire across dry grass. Wren stepped into the noise, his wooden sword replaced now by the dull iron blade of his father's making. He deflected a blow, sidestepped another. He saw faces, not enemies. Men thin from hunger, wild from fear, their eyes empty of choice. He struck only to move them away, never to kill, but war is a tide that ignores mercy. A blade caught his arm, shallow but sharp. He fell to one knee, the smell of blood strange and hot in the cool air. Then something shifted. The river beside the bridge rose with rain-swollen fury. Wren shouted, "Break the beams!" The men hesitated. "Now!" he cried. They pulled free the supports. The bridge collapsed, dragging fire and shouting into water. The river did what the villagers could not. When it was over, the valley echoed with nothing but rain. 5. The Fallen Teacher. In the morning, the survivors counted the lost. Among them was Brother Kian, the old monk who had once taught Wren to name sounds and remove them one by one. He had died while leading children across the hill path. They said his last act was to push a child forward and smile before the arrow struck. Wren stood at the place where Kian fell. He bowed deeply and whispered, "You once told me silence is housekeeping. Then you kept the last house with your life." He placed a single bamboo leaf on the ground. When the wind carried it away, he knew Kian's lesson had joined the others. 6. The Weight of Blood. That night Wren washed his sword in the river. The water turned faintly pink before clearing again. He stared at his reflection, calm face, tired eyes. He did not feel heroic. He thought of the man he had cut across the chest, the sound he made when he fell, half grunt, half sigh. Wren knew he would hear that sound for the rest of his life. He didn't want to forget it. Forgetting would mean losing his humanity. He looked at the current and whispered, "Forgive me. I was defending, not destroying." But the river did not answer this time. Perhaps forgiveness was not its job. 7. The Children and the Flute. After the burial, the village was silent for days. Wren repaired the bridge himself. When he finished, he sat by the water and took out the bamboo flute he had made from the fallen stalk. He played softly, a slow tune, shaped like mourning and gratitude. Children gathered, eyes wide, clutching each other. One asked, "Will the bad men come back?" Ren lowered the flute. "No," he said. "The wind carried them away." "Will Sensei Moro come back?" another child asked. Ren smiled gently. "He already has. You just don't know his face." He let the tune rise again, thinner, brighter. It was the first music since the battle. Even the river seemed to quiet to listen. 8. The Autumn of Fireflies. As the weeks passed, the wounds of the valley began to close. Rice stalks bent heavy with late grain. At night the fireflies returned, as if drawn by the last warmth of the dying leaves. Ren walked the fields with his mother. She said, "The gods tested us again." "You did what you could," he nodded, "but peace feels heavier now." "That is how real peace feels," she said. "It sits on the heart like a full bowl, fragile, precious." He thought of Moro, of Kayan, of all the quiet teachers. Their voices lived now in the weight of that bowl. 9. The Night of Red Leaves. One evening, Ren climbed the hill to the cedar grove. The moon hung low and red. Leaves fell like sparks, each one glowing briefly before vanishing into the dark. He took off his sword and laid it beside him. Then he sat cross-legged, hands on his knees, breathing with the rhythm of the wind. The blood, the screams, the fire, all drifted away like leaves on water. He was only breath again. When he opened his eyes, dawn had already touched the horizon. The world looked clean, washed by the night. He whispered, "The storm is gone. I am still here. So is the wind." 10. The Whisper of Ash. Later that day, Ren walked through the rebuilt village. Smoke rose from cooking fires. The smell was not of ruin, but of rice and tea. Children chased each other around the shrine steps. An old man beat a drum to call the hour. Ren paused. He could still hear faint echoes of the battle, but beneath them was something stronger, steadier, the heartbeat of the living. He touched the charm at his sword's hilt, the spiral the monk had given him. Wind, water, wood, fire, ash, and back to wind. He whispered, "Nothing ever ends. It only changes form." As he spoke, a red leaf landed on his palm. It was warm from the sun, trembling in the smallest breath of air. He held it a moment, then let it go. It spun upward before falling into the stream, carried away to places unseen. Ren smiled. He had survived not by force, but by understanding what force truly was, the quiet power to let go. The morning he left, Ren did not leave to chase glory. He left because the valley had taught him everything it could, and the wind inside his ribs had begun to circle with no place to go. He rose before dawn. His mother tied a small bundle of rice and pickled plum in a cloth the colour of river stones. His father set a brush in a bamboo case and slid it into Ren's pack beside the spare shirt and the flute. "No one is poorer for carrying a brush," Taro said with a smile that tried not to tremble. At the gate, Aya checked the knots on his sandals. "Listen more than you speak," she said, "and when you can't hear the world, be still until it finds you." Ren bowed to them both, then to the bamboo grove, which answered in the only way it knew, a slow nod of leaves. He stepped onto the road. The sky was pearl grey, the same colour as beginnings everywhere. 2. Traveller's Music. For 2 days he followed the river east, sleeping beneath pines or at shrines where foxes watched from the edge of lamplight. The road played its own music, merchants bargaining over wheels, children inventing games with stones, a travelling singer whose song was soft as evening heat. Wren kept his flute in his sleeve. He was shy of his sound among so many others. On the third day he fell in step with a porter, old and bent but quick-eyed. "First time to a castle town?" the man asked. Wren nodded. "Remember this," the porter said. "Town noise tells lies and truths at once. The lies are loud. You'll learn more from the soft parts." Wren stored the advice beside all the others that had brought him this far. By dusk the ridgeline broke open, and Herato spread below him. Roofs packed like lacquered scales, smoke rising in thin blue strands, and at the centre, the keep itself, layered white and black like winter and night stacked together. It seemed to hover, not by magic, but by the arrangements of men who had learned to put stone under motion and motion under oath. Wren stopped and bowed from afar. He felt not fear, but carefulness, the way one holds a bowl filled to the brim. The 3 gate voices. At the outer gate the guards checked bundles and papers. Wren had no paper. He had a letter stitched into memory. "I am Wren, son of Tero, the calligrapher of Hoshino. I seek work and teaching. I can write a clean hand and hold a clean breath." The senior guard looked at his pack, at the plainness of his clothes. "We have no use for poets," Wren bowed. "Then accept me as a hand that writes your ledgers, or a broom that writes the dust off the floor." That made the younger guards laugh, and laughter loosened the hinge of suspicion. "Try the registrar near the grain key," the senior said. "Or the South Dojo if you can pay in sweat." "I can," Wren said simply. As he entered, Herato hit him like surf. Hawkers selling fish bright as fallen moons, potters tapping bowls to hear their pitch, a knot of gamblers whose silence rang louder than their clatter. Above it all, the castle bells called the hour, bronze over breath. Wren paused just long enough to align his step with the city's rhythm. Then he walked on. 4. The South Dojo. The dojo sat back from the main street, past a garden of raked gravel where the patterns were so precise they seemed drawn by 1,000 patient hands. Wren inhaled. The air here held less smoke, more pine. Inside, a dozen trainees worked in pairs. Their teacher, Master Shun, was compact as a coiled rope. He watched Wren approach, eyes hooded but alert. "I have little money," Wren said, bowing. "I can copy texts at night to pay for instruction." "Do you have patience?" Shun asked. "I have hunger," Wren said, "and I've learned to sit with it." The teacher flicked a glance at Wren's calloused hands. "You'll start with the broom," Wren smiled. "A good beginning." That evening he swept the hall till the wood shone like still water, then copied 3 sets of training notes for senior students who were too mighty to love ink. At dawn, Master Shun placed a bokken in his hands. Forms first, then breath, then the reasons you thought you came. Wren bowed and began, not new, not old, simply more precise. Around him, the dojo's air held the tight sound of ambition. His own breath tried to remember rivers and wind. 5. Sadao. The third morning, a young man with shoulders like a festival drum arrived late and loud. He cut his bow short. He grinned at the girls peeking from the corridor. His name was Sadao, and he moved like someone who had learned early that the world makes room for a shout. "New boy," he said to Wren, eyeing the patched sleeve. "From a village?" "Yes," Wren said. Sadao smirked. "Then you know how to bow to trees. Here you'll bow to steel." Wren did not answer. He did not need to. Silence often lets a man hear his own boast. During practice, Sadao came at Ren with speed that tried to become power. Ren gave him angles and air. He lost points. He lost again. He did not hurry to win. Later, alone by the water tub, Sadao slammed his bokken into the rack and looked at Ren without malice. Only curiosity. "Why don't you strike when you can?" Ren wrung water from a cloth. "Because I can doesn't mean I should," Sadao snorted. "You'll fit the gate guard. They like men who stand all day thinking about not killing." "Perhaps," Ren said, smiling. 6. The Smith's Daughter. Paperwork paid little, but it paid regularly. Master Shun introduced Ren to a smithy near the eastern wall, where he could fetch coal and sweep filings for food. The forge was run by Master Tsubaki, a woman whose arms were songs in iron, and her daughter Kinu, who had a blacksmith's eyes and a poet's quiet. Kinu stood at the bellows, drawing breath for the fire with the grace of a dancer inhaling before a bow. Ren watched the flame change colour as air moved through it, from sullen red to keen white. "You're listening," Kinu said, not looking away from her work. "To what?" "To the part of the fire that isn't fire," she said. "Heat without shape, sound without note. You can hear it." Ren nodded. "My teachers called it the breath between strikes." She smiled, faint and quick. "Then the city won't break you. It breaks those who only hear the clang." Master Tsubaki quenched a blade and held it up. The metal sighed. "If you have patience," she said, "I will show you why swords that look the same are not the same." "I have patience," Ren said. "Good. Then start by sweeping the ash. The lesson begins underfoot." 7. Copyist Nights. By week's end, Ren's days had a rhythm strong enough to lean on. Dawn forms at the dojo, mid-morning at the forge where the fire began to know his name, afternoon at the registrar's bench, copying shipments of rice and barrels of salt, evening meditations, then sleep that came like rain. At the registrar he learned the city's veins, which wards sent fish late, and which temples always balanced their accounts to the grain, which merchant lied with perfect penmanship and which told the truth with ugly strokes. He learned that numbers, like men, carry breath, some shallow, some steady. Once, as Ren finished a ledger, the supervisor peered at his work. "You write as if the brush is part of your wrist," the man said. "Where did you train?" "In a valley that hated waste," Ren replied. "Good." The man tapped the page. "Ink is rice." Ren thought of hunger and bowed. Braced. The lesson in the yard. One evening Ren found Master Shun alone in the yard, looking up at a crescent moon caught in the net of bare branches. "Sensei," Ren asked, "how do I keep river calm when the dojo teachers storm?" Shun's mouth tilted. "Storms are louder teachers, but loudness is not depth." He drew a line in the sand with his toe. "We train 3 ways here: body, timing, and permission." Permission? When to allow harm, when to deny it. The first 2 are craft, the third is character. Ren held those words the way one holds a tea bowl, careful not to spill. "Tomorrow," Shun added, "you'll take a shift at the south gate. Watch the city through its hinges. It will teach you more than I can." 9. The south gate duty looked dull from afar, but up close it was a bell that struck every hour. Ren stood with a halberd he hoped not to use. He watched faces, the way farmers carried fatigue like a second yoke, the way gamblers hid eyes inside grins, the way hungry men looked past guards at shadows, counting exits. The city's pulse could be felt in the gaps between passers-by, a lull before a cart, the hush when word spread that a noble procession approached, the thickening in the throat of the crowd when a tax collector's banner showed its yellow teeth. At midday, a monk with a pack too rigid for cloth passed through. The bells at his waist were silent, a silence too careful. Wren stepped forward. "Brother, where is your begging bowl?" "In the pack," the man said. "May I see it?" The monk's left eye tightened, a door closing. Wren shook his head once gently and moved aside. "Pass in peace," he said, and signalled a runner behind the wall. 10 streets later, a warehouse guard found the monk sawing at a door in the shade. When asked how he'd known, Wren said only, "His silence rang." The captain of the gate laughed until he stopped. "You'll do," he said. Tene, Sadow's noise. Sadow grew louder as Wren grew quieter. His victories on the sparring floor stacked like stools. He sat on them as if they were a throne. He began to tease Wren with something close to admiration. "You're too soft to win," Sadow would say, panting after bouts he took by force. "Perhaps," Wren said, "but I'm hard to move." "Then move now," Sadow challenged one dawn, tossing a practice blade to Wren's feet. "Tomorrow, first light, behind the dojo. No witnesses, no judges." Wren looked at him a long time. "If we fight, let it be with a purpose." "The purpose is to find out which of us is more wrong about the world," Sadow grinned. Wren bowed. "Then I'll come to listen." 11. The Forge at Night. The night before the duel, Wren went to the forge. Kinu was there, alone, feeding coals with a measured arm. Sparks rose and settled on her sleeves like constellations deciding where to be born. "You're troubled," she said without turning. "I'm a pond the wind forgot to leave alone," Wren admitted. She nodded toward the quench trough. "Put your hand in the water." He did. Cold bit his skin, then forgave him. Kinu drew a blade from the fire and held it at the angle where heat is a visible breath. "Steel that goes to the water angry will crack," she said. "Steel that goes proud will warp, but steel that goes honest will sing." Wren watched the colour fade to the right shade of darkness. What is honest steel? The kind that doesn't pretend to be anything else. She looked at him then, the quick, direct glance of a craftsperson who prefers clean planes to complicated masks. Fight him if you must, but don't bring pride or anger to the water. Wren laughed softly. "What should I bring?" "Temperature," she said, and the word was a kindness. The right one. 12. Dawn mist pooled in the courtyard like breath held in cupped hands. Sadow stood already warm, bouncing on the balls of his feet. Wren bowed until his back felt like a bowstring drawn to the right note. They began. Sadow moved as he always did, forward, impatient with subtleties. Wren gave ground, not as a gift, but as a measurement. He answered when he had to, closed when he should, and watched Sadow's breath to hear the drum beneath the drum. "Strike!" Sadow barked. "When the leaf reaches the ground," Wren answered without words. 3 exchanges in, Wren saw it. The half-second Sadow spent admiring his own strike before recovering. It was a human moment, not a flaw, and Wren could almost feel Morrow's staff touch his wrist to remind him that understanding is also responsibility. He stepped in on the 4th exchange and didn't hit hard. He placed his blade where Sadow's would arrive, not where it was. Wood clacked. Surprise flashed. Sadow's weapon spun out and landed in the wet gravel with a sigh. Silence. A bird somewhere decided the matter was over and began its day. Sadow's face flushed, then drained. He looked at Wren, not with hate, but with something new. Room. You could have taken my head, he said. I'd rather keep your bow, Wren replied. Sadao blinked, then laughed once. Startled by a sound he didn't know he could make, he bowed low. Teach me not to admire myself in the middle of a stroke. Wren bowed lower. Teach me how to enter boldly when it's time. They straightened as equals who remembered being boys. The 13. The envoy's shadow word of the quiet duel moved through the dojo, the way tea scent moves through steam. Before it settled, the castle heralds made their own announcement. An imperial envoy would arrive within the week to inspect taxes, rice quotas, and the health of the garrison. The city changed key. Merchants polished ledgers to a shine, house fronts were scrubbed, banners mended, even the fishmongers learned to shout less. Master Shun called Wren and Sadao. You two will serve the escort, he said, one loud, one quiet. The envoy will need both kinds of guard. Sadao looked pleased with the first half of the sentence. Wren accepted the second with the same slow nod he gave Rain. Kinu dusted soot from her sleeves and handed Wren a strip of cloth dyed blue as deep water. For your sword hilt, she said, to remind you where temper comes from. Wren tied it and felt his breath choose its pace. Vultsus ni. 14. Sound of a larger drum. On the day the envoy entered Hirato, drums rolled like distant thunder packaged into a parade. Wren walked on the left flank. Sadao took the front, eyes bright, chin proud. Crowds pressed the edges of the street, not cheering, merely measuring. How heavy will the year be? A knot formed near the rice market. Voices rose, not the sharp sound of riot, but the soft, thick sound of people who have been polite too long. The envoy's bearers slowed. The palanquin swayed. Sadao's hand tightened on his halberd. Wren raised a palm, not to command, only to ask for one more breath. He stepped forward, letting the crowd feel his calm like a wall that does not push. Make space for the palanquin, he said, voice no louder than a well. Let trouble pass so it can keep going. A woman near the front met his gaze. In her eyes, tax ledgers, sick children, a winter that had not been gracious. Wren did not look away. He opened his stance, making room with the position of his body rather than the point of a blade. The crowd parted by inches that turned into feet. The palanquin moved again. A bell somewhere marked the hour of rice. Sadao exhaled like a man who had been holding up the gate by himself. When it was done, the envoy's curtain shifted. A voice from inside, cultured and curious, said, Who kept the peace without shouting? Sadao nodded toward Wren. Wren bowed toward the cloth. The voice said simply, Thank you for using space instead of blood. 15. Tea after noise. That evening a small messenger found Wren at the forge. The envoy invites you to tea tomorrow, he said, wide-eyed at his own words. Kinu raised an eyebrow. Tea with a man who weighs provinces, Wren smiled. Tea is tea, no matter whose cup it fills. Master Tsubaki muttered, Bring your quiet. Leave your oar. Wren slept like a stone in a river and woke without a ripple. The 16. The room with paper walls. The tea room overlooked a garden where the pine needles had been combed by a broom patient enough to be unseen. The envoy was no monster, a young man with ink-stained fingers, tired eyes, and a posture that tried to be less important than it was. I've read of guards who enforce law, he said after the first bowl, but today I saw a guard who enforced distance enough for people to remember decency. Wren set his bowl down. Space calms the hand, silence calms the breath, then talk can do its job. The envoy smiled without envy. If you ever grow tired of iron, come weigh paper with me. I hope to grow tired of neither, Wren said. Iron teaches paper to be brave. Paper reminds iron why it should be. The envoy laughed softly, a sound like a ledger closing without error. Walk with me tomorrow, he said. We will visit the granaries. I want to see what your city keeps in the dark. Wren bowed. Yes. The castle town had not made Wren louder. It had taught him to hear noise without swallowing it, to carry river patience through crowded gates, to keep a blade honest in the forge of other people's heat. He was not famous, he did not wish to be, but in the registry of small necessary things his name had begun to be written where it mattered, in the memory of a proud rival, in the palm of a smith's daughter, and in the quiet remark of a man whose job was to measure a nation's breadth. The road had not ended, it had simply become streets, and Wren walked them the way he had walked every path since he was a boy, counting the soft parts first. The whisper before winter, the envoy remained in Hirato for another moon. With him came rumour, the kind that travels faster than grain carts. People said the shogun's inspectors would soon judge the city's discipline by a single exhibition bout between its finest swordsmen. It was a ceremony more than a test, yet reputations and stipends hung from it like bells from a shrine beam. Master Shun gathered the students in the dojo courtyard. The castle has asked for 2 names, he said. One must show strength, one must show composure. His gaze fell upon Sadao and then upon Wren. You know which of you carries which fire. A murmur rippled through the line. Wren bowed. Sadao grinned, but even his grin had learned humility since the morning of their private duel. He stepped forward. Sensei, may the city watch calm and storm meet without shame. So be it, Shun answered. Train not to defeat each other, but to reveal what cannot be taught. 2. Preparation. Through late autumn the dojo became a hive. Students polished floors until the boards shone like still ponds. Wren spent evenings alone practicing moku no kata, the forms of stillness. Each movement was an echo of his valley. Inhale, stream, exhale, wind, step, bamboo, pause, stone. Sadao practiced thunder. From dawn till dusk he struck until his palms bled, and yet he smiled. Once he found Wren meditating by the well. You sit while I sweat, he said. I sweat while I sit, Wren replied. Sadao laughed, threw him an apple, and left the joke unspoiled. At night, Kinu mended Wren's training jacket with thread the colour of rain. Cloth tears where strain hides, she said. Men too, Wren asked. And if I tear? Then the light will know where to escape, she said. 3. The morning of spectacle snow threatened but never fell. Crowds gathered in the castle courtyard, layers of silk and straw rustling like reeds in wind. Drums marked the hour. The envoy stood beside the magistrate, a pale scarf around his throat. Master Shun bowed before them. When Wren and Sadao stepped into the ring of sand, the world narrowed to breath. The sun broke through a gap in clouds, catching the edge of their wooden swords so they looked briefly alive. The herald called, "Commence." 4. The clash without anger. Sadao opened with the vigour of spring flood, precise, unstoppable. Wren met him with ebb and redirection, letting each strike fall into absence. The crowd gasped when wood met wood and sang instead of cracking. They moved through the forms they had rehearsed, yet something began to change. Sadao pressed harder, not from pride but from joy. Wren answered faster, not from fear but from recognition. For a moment they were not opponents at all, two halves of one intention, carving silence into shape. Then came the slip. A patch of sand gave way beneath Sadow's heel. His balance wavered. Instinct made Ren's body surge forward, the finishing cut already born in his shoulder. And then the valley's wind whispered, "Mercy is heavier than steel." Ren stopped the blade a hair's breadth from Sadow's throat. The crowd's breath froze. Only the envoy moved, folding his fan with a quiet snap that sounded like applause. 5. The Beau Sadow blinked at the sword tip, then laughed softly, lowering his head. "You win the duel," he said, "and I keep my neck. Both of us walk home." Ren withdrew the blade and bowed so low the sand kissed his forehead. "I win nothing if you bow lower," he said. They straightened together. The envoy stepped forward. "2 swords," he announced, "and 1 lesson. Restraint is the final art." The crowd answered with the rarest sound a city can make: stillness. 6. After the noise. When the courtyard emptied, snow finally began to fall, thin flakes that refused to land where blood had not been spilled. Sadow stood beside Ren beneath the eaves. "I thought victory would feel loud," he said. Ren smiled. "That's because victory often mistakes itself for thunder." They watched the flakes gather on the wooden rail. "Will you stay in the city?" Sadow asked. "For a while," Ren said. "The wind hasn't decided where to send me." "Then when it does, let it tell me." "It will," Ren promised. 7. The invitation. 2 days later, a messenger from the castle arrived at the forge. "The envoy requests your presence for a commission," he told Ren. Master Tsubaki crossed her arms. "If he wants a sword, he can order one from me." The messenger bowed. "He wants one from him," pointing at Ren. Ren was bewildered. He had forged nothing but practiced knives and nails. Yet that night Tsubaki laid a billet of steel on the anvil. "Then you will make it," she said, "and you will make it honest." Kinu set the bellows in motion. Sparks rose like questions too bright to answer. Ren felt the rhythm return. Strike, turn, listen, strike, turn, breathe. The fire remembered his patience. 8. The Sword of No Pride. Weeks passed. The billet stretched, folded, and sang beneath hammer and water. Ren learned the language of heat. Yellow for arrogance, orange for doubt, pale blue for truth. When the blade finally shone like frozen wind, Tsubaki nodded once. "It will cut nothing it shouldn't," she said. Ren engraved a single character near the tang, Mu, meaning emptiness. He wrapped the hilt with the deep water cloth Kinu had given him and delivered it to the envoy. The man held it up to the light. "It reflects," he murmured, "but shows no face." Ren bowed. "Then it has learned its lesson." 9. Mirror Festival. That spring, the city held its annual Mirror Festival, when artisans displayed their finest lacquer, glass, and polished metal. Ren wandered through the stalls, watching people gaze at their own faces, some with delight, others with unease. He realized that reflection was its own battlefield. Everyone sought a version of themselves they could survive. Kinu joined him, carrying a tray of small copper mirrors. "Buy one," she said, "so you'll know if you start looking like the men you protect." Ren smiled. "If that day comes, may it crack before I do." Shaten. Departure. The envoy departed soon after, taking with him the sword of Mu. Before leaving, he told Master Shun, Your student carries a still pond inside his chest. Guard it, or the world will try to fish in it." Shan replied, "Ponds that deep guard themselves." When Ren came to bow farewell, the envoy offered him a travel pass sealed with red wax. "If ever you wish to walk beyond this province, this will open gates for you," he said. Ren accepted it, but slipped it into his sleeve unread. Gates, he knew, were polite suggestions. The wind opened more. 11. A night at the forge. The forge glowed quiet. Tsubaki slept. Kinu dozed against the wall, soot on her cheek. Ren finished quenching a small blade meant for farm work, not war. He thought of all the faces mirrored in the envoy's sword, of all the hands that might one day hold it, and of how none would know his name. That anonymity felt right, the clean relief after exertion, the emptiness after music ends. He whispered to the fire, "Guard them as you guarded me." The coals answered with a sigh that might have been yes. 12. The Call of Wind. At dawn the wind changed. It smelled of sea salt and far-off rain. Ren packed lightly, flute, brush, and the stone Moro had once left on his palm. Kinu walked him to the road. "Will you come back?" she asked. "When the wind forgets my name," he said. She nodded, an answer between promise and blessing. He started down the path, the city shrinking behind him like a bell fading in mist. The road ahead bent toward mountains. Each step was a note of a song he hadn't finished writing. And somewhere in the distance, another story waited, of new teachers, harsher winters, and the last lesson every warrior must learn, that courage is not the roar before battle, but the whisper that rebuilds what battle leaves behind. The long road to Salt. The road south wound through mist. Villages thinned, the hills grew teeth of stone. Ren walked alone, though not lonely. His own breath was company enough. Every dawn he bowed to the east, not in worship, but in gratitude for another beginning. After weeks of travel, the air thickened with salt. He smelled the sea before he saw it, an old breath, wide and forgiving. When the land finally fell away, the horizon opened like a wound healing in light. The ocean stretched without promise or threat, only endless conversation. Ren stood on a cliff above the harbour of Mikawa, where gulls wheeled like thoughts too free to land. The sound was both chaos and order, thousands of waves arriving together yet never in the same way. He whispered, "So this is the last teacher." Two, the fisherman's village. The harbour smelled of tar, fish, and prayer. Boats rocked on their ropes like children fighting sleep. Ren traded a week's copying work for a place to stay. A shack facing the tide, its roof patched with driftwood. By day he helped mend nets. By night he copied shipping logs for the harbour master, whose calligraphy looked like storms learning to write. The sea air roughened Ren's hands, but his strokes grew steadier. He found peace in the rhythm. Tie, knot, brush, wave. One evening an old fisherman named Jiro pointed at the horizon. "Storm's brewing," he said. "The kind that swallows lanterns." Ren nodded. "Then we should make our knots honest." Jiro laughed. "You talk like a monk who forgot the temple." "Maybe I found one big enough for everyone," Ren said, looking at the sea. 3. The boy in the rope among the fishermen was a boy named Tama, small and fearless, who followed Ren everywhere. He asked questions the wind might have asked if it had a tongue. "Sensei," Tama said one day, "why don't you carry a real sword?" Ren smiled. "Because my teachers took the sharpness out of my hands and put it into my eyes. Tama frowned. But what if pirates come? Then I will ask the sea to roar louder than they can shout. The boy thought hard, then nodded solemnly. That's a good sword. From that day he carried a piece of driftwood tied with a rope and called it his wind sword. 4. The storm. The storm arrived without warning. The sea turned black, then silver, then black again, like a great animal changing its skin. Waves leapt high enough to scrape the sky. Boats strained against their moorings. Lanterns swung like frightened stars. Jiro's eldest son was caught outside the bay, his small fishing boat vanishing and reappearing in the foam. Ren did not think. He grabbed a coil of rope and ran to the shore. The rain hit sideways, 1,000 needles. Tama clung to his leg, shouting, "You can't go!" Ren knelt. Someone must. He pressed the stone Moro had given him into the boy's hand. Hold this until the wind forgets to scream. Then he plunged into the surf. 5. The lesson of the sea. The water was colder than fear. Ren fought for each breath, counting waves the way monks count prayers. He found the overturned boat, its hull shining like a dying moon. A man clung to it, barely conscious. Ren tied the rope around his chest. The pullback was agony. Every surge threatened to take them both. He remembered Moro's voice. Feel how it pushes, then yields. He stopped fighting and let the sea carry them part of the way, steering only when it allowed. When the next wave broke, it threw them onto the rocks like driftwood. Hands reached, voices shouted. Ren felt himself lifted, weightless, then heavy again, then nothing. 6. The sky. After he woke 3 days later in Jiro's hut, bandaged and fevered, Tama sat beside him, the stone in his lap. "You said I should give it back when the wind stopped screaming," the boy whispered. "It's quiet now." Ren smiled weakly. Then the lesson worked. Outside, the sea was calm again, its fury spent, its patience restored. Jiro entered, leaning on his staff. "You pulled my son from the tide. The gods owe you nothing. You've already taken their job." Ren shook his head. "I did what the sea allowed." Chapter 7. The Fisherman's Gift. When Ren could walk again, Jiro brought him a gift. A small dagger with a blade of dull silver. "It's no warrior's weapon," the old man said, "made from a broken anchor, but it's strong enough to cut rope or free a trapped hand. Use it only to release, never to harm." Ren accepted it with both hands. He carved into the hilt a single word, release. That night he sat by the shore, dagger beside him, flute in hand. The melody he played had no rhythm, no beginning or end. It rose and fell like waves forgetting their own names. He realized he had stopped playing to remember and started playing to dissolve. Shade. The letter winter passed into the pale blush of spring. Ren wrote a letter to his parents, though he did not know if it would reach the valley. He wrote, "Father, your brush taught me to see the world's handwriting. Mother, your patience taught me to hear its pauses. I carry both in every breath. I have found teachers in wind, fire, hunger, and sea. If the gods have more to say, they can whisper it into the tide." He sealed the letter and gave it to a trader heading inland. Then he bowed toward the mountains he could no longer see. 9. The Grave of Clouds. In the 6th month of that year a strange sight came to Mikawa. A cloud so low it touched the water. It lingered for 3 days. unmoving. The fisherman called it the Grave of Clouds, a gate between worlds. Wren climbed the cliff to see it. The mist lay thick as milk swallowing sound. He stood at the edge where rock met vapour and felt the world blur, sea, sky and self merging. He spoke softly. Sensei Moro, Brother Kyan, all the voices I carry. I have not learned how to conquer, but I have learned how to stay. He took the flute from his sleeve and played one last note into the cloud. The sound vanished immediately, as if the world had accepted it. Then he smiled, not with joy, not with sorrow, but with perfect balance. When Tama came running up the hill later, the cliff was empty. Only the flute remained, resting on a stone, still warm from a hand. Epilogue, the whisper that remains. Years passed. The boy grew, learned to fish, to listen, to be still. He kept the stone and the flute side by side on his windowsill. When storms came, he placed them together in a bowl of water so the sea could visit the memory of its student. Travellers who came through Mikawa sometimes spoke of a figure walking the shore at dawn, a man with no shadow, leaving no footprints, his robe moving like tide grass. They said he carried neither sword nor pack, only wind. Jiro would nod when he heard these tales. Ren never left, he'd say. He just learned to move at a different depth. And the sea, each time it touched the sand, seemed to agree, bowing and retreating like a disciple before a master whose lessons had become the world itself. 11. Closing words. If you listen closely to waves, you will hear them breathe his story of a boy who dreamed of being a warrior and became something quieter and far braver. He did not seek immortality. He sought understanding, and that is the only thing the wind never forgets. So when you hear the hush between two gusts, when a leaf pauses before falling, when silence feels full instead of empty, that is Ren's whisper, reminding you that strength has many sounds, and the softest of them last the longest. Part 1, where titles turn to smoke power, when everyone agrees to believe in it, can look like a mountain. And yet, in the waning half of the 15th century, the mountain that was the Ashikaga shogunate crumbled as if touched by a breath. Courtiers still bowed in halls dappled with gold leaf. Poems still traced the moon across lacquered screens. The tea bowl still passed in spirals of etiquette. But outside the painted doors a different rhythm took hold. Boots in mud, ash on wind, and banners that bloomed like sudden storms along the roads to Kyoto. Imagine a city proud enough to call itself a mirror of the country's soul, Kyoto, slowly becoming a map of its undoing. The Onin War began not with thunder, but with a paper-thin disagreement about succession, a question so familiar in human history that it hardly needs explanation. Who should rule? And why should any of us accept it? Steel answered where words failed. Houses burned to their foundations once, twice, again. Whole districts reddened the sky. People who had learned the order of bells and seasons learned instead the language of flight. In that furnace, certainties melted. The shogun's writ became a rumour. Noble houses shattered into factions. Retainers looked past their lords and asked a new question. Who can keep me alive and make me greater? The answer shifted by the month. Oaths, once lifelong, grew short and conditional. For the first time in living memory, a war was not an interruption of the calendar. War was the calendar. The monks heard this music too. Across mountain terraces and river towns, great Buddhist institutions, custodians of land and learning, felt, as all powers do, the pull to defend themselves not with sutras alone but with men. Armies of commoners and dispossessed samurai the Ikki rose beneath the banners of faith, and monasteries became fortresses threaded with stockpiles, watchfires, and a discipline as hard as iron. If rule was a matter of strength, then monasteries would be strong. A system unravels in layers. The emperor still performed rites. The shogun still occupied rooms lined with brocade. The nobles still owned names that made walls bow wide. But the road belonged to the warlords. The daimyo and the road around Kyoto outnumbered the rooms within it. In the distance you could hear something new. Not the great battle once a generation, but a constant picking of locks, small fights, quick betrayals, sieges that worried stone into surrender, and sudden, ingenious strikes that rewrote the day before a messenger could reach the gate. Among the many men who learned to live in this rhythm, two would come to embody opposite truths of war. Takeda Shingen, the engineer of momentum, and Yosugi Kenshin, the cold clarity of a blade held exactly in doctrine's light. Part 2. Wind, Forest, Fire, Mountain. Shingen ruled in a place that made hardness a virtue, Kai Province, a country of ribbed mountains and short harvests. The Takeda were ancient, their name a kind of coin. But inheritance in this era was not a bank vault. It was flint. Shingen struck it until sparks became a doctrine. Move with wind, be still as forest, strike like fire, hold like a mountain. Cavalry swift, tightly drilled, unromantic in purpose, would be his battering ram and scalpel. He refused theatrical war, no moonlit parades of valor, no stately exchanges. He preferred to arrive, to break, to leave. Kenshin rose differently. Where Shingen stripped war down to leverage and time, Kenshin carried into battle a sense of order that felt liturgical. In Echigo, he strengthened roads, cleaned the arteries of trade, and turned cities into organs that beat evenly against chaos. He loved the idea that a sword could be the world's correction, not its defacement. He did not dream of Kyoto. He dreamed that justice might be made tangible, and that his army might be its instrument. Between them lay Shinano, a key that could twist open the north. They met and met again at Kawanakajima, a valley that learned the shape of armies the way river stones learn hands. The first encounter was a chess problem, the second a trap sprung, the third an answered rumour, the fourth the red-lit legend in which Kenshin drove hard through fog at dawn and found Shingen in the still centre of his camp. Steel swung, an iron war fan sparked and held. For a heartbeat, war itself seemed to balance on the hinge of that fan. Then guards arrived. The river took back its reflection. Both men withdrew. Nothing decided, everything understood. You might think such rivalries settle nations. They do not. They keep the fire hot while other cooks prepare larger meals. Far off, a different recipe was being made by a man whose enemies first mistook him for foolish. Oda Nobunaga. Third part of 3, a young lord who broke the cup. To men who prize ceremony, Nobunaga's manner looked like vandalism. He wore what he pleased. He ignored the scripts of grief, the etiquette of corridors, the inspections of eyes that hovered, always, to measure his compliance. But that disobedience veiled a mind unusually precise about a single thing: results. In a world taught to admire the tasteful delay, the negotiation, the alliance for show, Nobunaga studied the thin places in routine where a strike could pass like a knife between ribs. When Imagawa Yoshimoto marched west under a forest of banners, He carried with him 2 centuries of the old order's confidence. Big army, good pedigree, ceremonial thunder. The road to Kyoto looked open. Nobunaga, a small lord by the ink of it, seemed a formality along the way. Rain, however, loves the man who will use it. In a storm-dark valley called Okehasama, Nobunaga led a lightning cut through Imagawa's relaxed, rain-loosened camp. Fires rose, discipline failed, and in the wet earth the dynasty-minded general fell. A reputation, that night, died with him. Another was born. Japan learned a lesson that the age would punish it for forgetting. Numbers are useless if their mind is sleeping. Okehazama was not a single miracle, but the first proof that Nobunaga would play by rules others declared dishonourable. Surprise, speed, improvisation made formal. Where lords prized duels, he prized volleys. Where nobles counted summers by tea gatherings, he measured them by fortresses turned to charcoal and trade routes stitched back into consistency under his authority. He recruited beyond samurai ranks, drilled men to the clock, and insisted that the matchlock resented by purists was not an insult to courage but a new geometry of time and distance. Geometry can end worlds. At Nagashino, Nobunaga taught that truth to the survivors. Behind palisades, his gunners fired in rotations, 1-line shooting, another reloading, a third ready, until the famous Takeda cavalry unmade itself against the continuous hail. In the mud, chivalry found its limit. The myth of the single perfect charge, beautiful as a story, died there under practical arcs of lead. Power that does not want rivals does not stop at changing battlefields. It changes maps of meaning. On Mount Hiei, the long-standing strength of warrior monks, emboldened by centuries of influence, became a challenge to this program of unification. Nobunaga did not beg. He ringed the mountain and burned Enryakuji to its foundations. Men, women, children, the whole terrible arithmetic of finality. The country reeled. Piety gasped. But every war has its cathedral, and for Nobunaga the cathedral was order. He would not share its altar. If the West objected, he would bring his order there too. Against the Mori, masters of ports and sea lanes, he orchestrated a multi-front pressure and assigned to a brilliant Lieutenant Toyotomi Hideyoshi the strangest siege. Flood the fortress at Takamatsu. Earth and water became siege engines. Patience became a weapon. The Mori bent. Victory loomed. And then, from a man he had once favoured, came a knife where armour is thinnest, the back. Party 4. Fire at Honnoji. The traitor's name was Akechi Mitsuhide. The place, Honnoji, a temple Nobunaga had entered for rest, stripped of his usual mass of steel. Night clung to eaves. Orders snapped like brittle sticks. Flames rose. Nobunaga, cornered and too proud to be a trophy, chose to end his life inside that burning frame. A tiger cannot be caged, historians would say, if the tiger refuses the cage. News in this age did not travel by ink alone. Fear and opportunity carried it faster. Far away, Tokugawa Ieyasu careful, patient, the tortoise who understood that hair stories end badly, found himself exposed. The road home ran through Iga, a country of shadow workers whose skill at making men disappear had become legend. Ieyasu's salvation was a man who could speak the language of both sword and shadow, Hattori Hanzo. Under his guidance and the silent guardianship of Iga's clans, Ieyasu crossed the green, dangerous weave of that province like a thread through a seam no enemy could find. Another heard the same news and acted with a different instrument, speed. Hideyoshi, Nobunaga's once lowborn prodigy page turned general turned architect of long victories made peace with the Mori in a breath, and brought his army east with such velocity that the traitor scarcely had time to finish a sentence. At Yamazaki, Akichi's page of history ended in ink so dark it swallowed his name. Hideyoshi, by sword and momentum, claimed the stewardship of Nobunaga's unfinished design. Ye part ferme, the peasant who reached the roof. If Nobunaga had been the hammer that broke old forms, Hideyoshi was the hand that learned to build with the shards. His origins, humble to the point of legend, were not a joke in his enemies' mouths for long. He excelled at the three tasks most rulers fear: finishing what others start, convincing the wavering to find loyalty in your wind, and knowing when patience is simply a disguise for failure. He closed the circle of unification with a choreographer's sense for timing, negotiating when it saved blood, crushing when delay invited worse blood later. In the end, provinces that had grown used to the taste of independence learned to prefer the taste of predictable taxes. The court recognized him not merely as a daimyo among many, but as the man whose will set the calendar. Japan, for the first time in too many lives, looked on a map and saw a single weather. Power is a fever that argues with the horizon. Hideyoshi, having climbed the last stairs of the house, looked out the roof window and saw China ancient, dazzling, and very far. Between Japan and that idea stood Korea, which had no interest in becoming anyone's hallway. Hideyoshi decided that reluctance was not a sufficient argument. He would march. The Imjin War began like a hawk's dive and became a trudge through thorns. The first months offered the illusion of ease. Cities taken, roads opened, confidence rising like heat off armour. Then Korea's will organised. Chinese armies arrived with discipline and numbers, and at sea the ingenious crescents of Admiral Yi Sun-sin carved supply lines into confetti. Japan's warriors, hungry and far from the granaries of home, learned that courage cannot be eaten and that disease is the fiercest general in any long campaign. Hideyoshi tried again. The second wave broke on the same reef. His health failed as the war ground itself into a standstill. He died with the continent still a dream, and the home he had unified beginning to fray at the edges he had stretched. Vacuum is a kind of invitation. Into it stepped the man who had studied the entire era as if it were one long game of Go, Tokugawa Ieyasu. The saucer rings. The quiet net Hideyoshi had left a child behind, and, around the child, a council meant to restrain wolves. Wolves do not respect fences when the shepherd sleeps. Ieyasu did what patient men do best. He moved quietly, often invisibly until the board belonged to him. Marriage bonds were knotted, promises curled like incense through halls. Coin learned the way to exactly the right hands. Spies did not whisper rumours, they delivered proofs. By the time enemies found their courage, they also found their neighbours standing a little too far away. The final argument for order unfolded on a plain called Sekigahara, under a morning fog that gave treachery a veil and truth a theatre. Two armies faced one another, the Western coalition of Ishida Mitsunari, numerically strong and splendidly placed, and Ieyasu's Eastern army, less certain on paper but blessed with something paper cannot capture: leverage. Kobayakawa Hideaki, a young commander on a hill, stood at the pivot. He hesitated. Ieyasu, reading hesitation as danger, chose to resolve the equation with gunfire, on the man who had not yet chosen. Under the shot's dull logic, Kobayakawa chose Ieyasu. The western line, struck in the spine by yesterday's friend, folded in cracking segments. Seconds later it was still a battle. Minutes later it was a defeat. An hour later it was a new country. Ieyasu did not mistake victory for permission to be cruel without purpose. The head must be cut. The body must be spared if it can be useful. Enemies who had made themselves irreconcilable were executed. Others, who bent fast and honestly, were reduced, repositioned, and strange alchemy turned into pillars of the new house. If you want peace to last, you must teach former foes to profit by it. In 1603, the title of shogun returned to a pair of hands that intended to hold it not as a trophy but as a system. Edo, the city that would one day be called Tokyo, became the gravity around which lords orbited in carefully measured paths. Roads grew safer. Merchants developed the habit of expecting tomorrow. The swords that had once settled arguments were now mostly ornamental in rooms where paper walls kept secrets better than armor ever could. The long war had ended. The memory of it lay like a shadow across the tatami of a whole age, warning in its silence. When law becomes costume and power forgets its purpose, men will teach both a lesson. And yet, out of that lesson, a different Japan took shape, one that loved its order so much it barely breathed for 2.5 centuries. Now, we return to Japan, not the Japan of burning capitals and clashing armies, but of restoration, precision, and order. The swords are sheathed, the banners folded. What rises from the ashes of chaos is something far stranger. An empire of silence, built on discipline, fear, and beauty. I, the shape of peace. When Tokugawa Ieyasu established his rule, he did not rebuild Japan as a monument to victory. He rebuilt it as a machine, delicate, stable, and endlessly repeating. The Edo Bakufu, his military government, became a clock that measured obedience instead of time. The wars had taught him 2 truths. 1. Power scattered is power wasted. 2. Power unobserved is power lost. To make the peace last, he needed to make motion itself suspicious. Thus began the Edo period, more than 2.5 centuries where stillness became the law of life. But stillness does not mean sleep. It means tension held so perfectly that no string dares to vibrate. Every great daimyo, the proud warlords who once ruled their provinces like miniature kingdoms, were now tethered to Edo, bound by a ritual called Sankin Kotai. Once every 2 years, each lord had to travel from his domain to the shogun's capital, accompanied by his entire retinue, wives, children, soldiers, servants, horses, and banners. The journey was long, expensive, ceremonial, and intentional. While the lords marched east, their wealth drained into the road, into inns, tolls, gifts, and displays of loyalty. And when they left Edo to return home, they left something behind, their families. Wives and heirs remained as hostages of peace, living beneath the shogun's watchful eyes. It was not chains that kept the country united, but distance, exhaustion, and ritual. Tseku's Edo, the heart that never slept. Edo itself, the city of rivers, bridges, and soft mist, swelled like a living organism. From a fishing village near the Sumida River, it became the largest city in the world by the 18th century. Over 1 million souls packed into wooden streets, sliding doors, and layers of human rhythm. At dawn, the drums of the castle marked time. The city stirred. Fishmongers, paper-makers, artisans, apprentices, and poets alike. Sack sellers opened shutters. Monks swept temple courtyards. Samurai polished swords they would never draw. Peace had turned Japan into an island that dreamed with its eyes open. In the narrow alleys of Edo, new arts were born, art that reflected not conquest but quiet perfection. Kabuki, once wild and forbidden, became the theatre of emotion disciplined by pattern. Haiku replaced epics, short, exact, self-contained worlds of 17 syllables. Ukiyo-e, the pictures of the floating world, turned fleeting pleasure into eternity. Courtesans, landscapes, the soundless crash of waves at Kanagawa. In a strange irony, an age built on restriction birthed the freest imagination Japan had ever known. 3. The Vanishing Blade. To maintain order, Ieyasu's descendants learned to control not only bodies but symbols. They knew that swords were not weapons anymore, they were identities, so they kept the swords but dulled their meaning. The samurai, once a caste of warriors, became bureaucrats with blades. They collected rice stipends instead of plunder. They managed villages instead of battles. Their honour still demanded discipline, but their service was now measured in ledgers, not victories. With no wars to fight, the samurai turned inward. They studied Zen, Confucian ethics, calligraphy, and the art of dying well. The code of Bushido, once a living instinct, became philosophy. What was once the blood of the battlefield turned into the ink of manuals, each teaching how to live and die with decorum. But beneath the calm, a slow decay began. A sword that never cuts rusts from the inside. As generations passed, stipends shrank, and the once proud class found itself impoverished, selling heirlooms, tutoring peasants' children, or drinking away memories of glory. Their lacquered armour became costumes in parades, their legends bedtime stories. Yet their ghost of dignity haunted the nation, an echo of a sharper time that would one day demand to be heard again. 4. The Hidden Farmers and the Quiet Revolts. While the lords and scholars discussed virtue, the peasants counted harvests and taxes. Rice, the foundation of everything, became not just food, but currency, measurement, and bondage. To be a farmer was to feed a hierarchy that ate more than it worked. The Tokugawa regime, fearing the chaos of peasant uprisings, created a web of inspectors, temple registries, and surveillance. Every village had to record its births, deaths, and prayers. Every person was bound to their place, their craft, their role. To travel required a permit. To think too loudly could be heresy. But still, small revolts flared like brush fire after drought. Starvation and bad weather often sparked riots, not to overthrow the system, but to remind it of its own promises. Each rebellion was crushed quietly, with the efficiency of a hand smoothing a wrinkle in silk. Yet the wrinkles never disappeared entirely. Chafu, the closed door and the hidden window beyond Japan's shores. The world was changing fast. Empires rose on ships with black sails, and markets devoured the distance between continents. But for Japan, the Tokugawa chose seclusion, a policy called Sakoku, the closed country. No Japanese could leave under pain of death. Foreigners who arrived without permission met the same fate. Only the Dutch, through a small artificial island in Nagasaki Bay called Dejima, were allowed to trade, a single needle's eye through which the world trickled in. Through this narrow gate came glass, telescopes, medicine, books of science, fragments of Europe's awakening. They mixed with Japanese curiosity and became rangaku, Dutch learning. In the back rooms of temples and the corners of scholars' houses, men dissected the secrets of stars and bodies, sketching the unseen in quiet defiance of isolation. Isolation preserved Japan's peace, but it also sealed it in amber. When the outer world finally knocked again, it would not ask politely. 6. The sound of cannons at the gate. 2.5 centuries after Ieyasu's victory, the calm that had seemed eternal shattered with the thunder of foreign guns. In 1853, black ships appeared in Edo Bay, American steamers, smoke pouring like ink across the sky. They carried not only trade demands, but time itself, modernity, industry, the quick rhythm of a world that no longer waited. Commodore Matthew Perry delivered the Shogun an ultimatum: open the ports or face destruction. No army in Japan could have resisted. The Tokugawa machine, so perfect in stillness, could not turn fast enough to face motion. The treaty that followed cracked the isolation, and the air that rushed in was both oxygen and poison. Merchants grew rich, samurai fell poorer. Foreign schools, factories and weapons appeared faster than the old codes could interpret them. The spell of peace, broken after 260 years, released the energies it had long suppressed. The Meiji Restoration was not a revolution of words, but of velocity. The shogun stepped down. The emperor returned to power, in name, and a country that had forgotten how to run began sprinting into the future, desperate to catch the world it had once refused to see. The whisper that remains. Every empire is a conversation between power and time. The Sengoku age had screamed its truths in blood. The Tokugawa age whispered them in ink, and the Meiji age shouted them again in steel and smoke. But listen closely. Beneath the roar of progress, the whisper of that old mountain wind still survives. Swift as the wind, silent as the forest, fierce as fire, immovable as the mountain. It speaks of a Japan that learned through endless cycles of chaos and calm that every peace is temporary, and every storm a teacher. Now, if you've reached this point, drifting somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, let the rest of the world fade away. You've walked through 500 years of war, faith, fire, and order. You've seen temples burn, cities rise, peasants rebel, and poets find stillness in the smallest moments. Now open your eyes within the dawn of a new Japan. The year is 1868. The air smells of coal and cherry blossoms. The old world has ended, but the new one still trembles like a sword pulled too quickly from its sheath. The Meiji Restoration has begun. Jai the Emperor returns, and the shogun steps aside. For more than 2 centuries, the shoguns of the Tokugawa clan ruled from Edo with invisible hands. The emperor, cloistered in Kyoto, lived as a shadow of divine ritual, a god who signed documents but commanded no soldiers. But now the wind had shifted. Foreign ships had broken the spell of isolation. Their smoke, black and oily, had risen like a warning. The world beyond the sea was moving faster than prayer, faster than etiquette, faster than the pace of the old Japan. Within the court, young nobles whispered of reform, of renewal, of Meiji, meaning enlightened rule. They dreamed of a nation reborn, not divided into clans and feudal oaths, but united under the emperor as the soul of a single, modern state. The last shogun, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, saw the tide and understood what all wise men do when history turns. Resistance would only drown him faster. So with a gesture that stunned both enemies and allies, he resigned. He returned power to the emperor, not out of surrender but out of calculation. Better to yield with dignity than to die for the illusion of control. And yet, peace did not return so easily. The empire could not be reborn without blood. 2. The fall of the old swords. Across Japan, the samurai watched in disbelief as their world dissolved. Their stipends vanished, their privileges evaporated, and the swords that once defined their status became ornaments, symbols of a caste now obsolete. Some accepted the change, seeking work in the new bureaucracy, or teaching their children Western languages. Others could not. For them, the Meiji Restoration was not enlightenment but betrayal. They had lived by the sword, and could not live without it. In 1877, the final storm of the old spirit erupted. The Satsuma Rebellion, led by Saigo Takamori, once a loyal servant of the new government, now its greatest enemy. Saigo was the last true samurai in every sense. Noble, disciplined, and doomed. He believed that Japan's rush toward Western ways, railways, telegraphs, military conscription, had stripped it of its soul. He and his followers rose in protest, not to seize power, but to preserve honour. They marched against the imperial army with courage but no hope. Their rifles were few, their ideals unbending. And when the cannons of the new Meiji government roared, the last dream of the samurai age was buried beneath the thunder of modern artillery. When the smoke cleared, Saigo lay dying on the field at Shiroyama. He took his own life, the old way, seppuku, facing east toward the rising sun. Even the emperor mourned him. The government declared him an enemy in life, but a hero in death. Japan, they said, could never have been reborn without men like him, men willing to die for the idea of what Japan had been. 3. The fire of change. After the rebellion, the Meiji government accelerated its transformation. Feudal domains were abolished, and provinces were reorganized under the central authority of the emperor. Samurai became soldiers in a modern conscript army. Peasants, once tied to the soil, became citizens bound by law and tax. Railways spread like veins across the islands. Telegraph wires hummed between cities. Factories rose where rice once grew. Western clothing, architecture, and science arrived like a flood. Tokyo, once Edo, became the symbol of the new Japan. Gas lamps flickered along its streets. Foreign teachers, engineers, and doctors filled its schools. And yet, amid this strange mixture of East and West, Japan found a way to remain itself, adapting like water poured into a new vessel, taking shape without losing essence. In the year 1889, the emperor granted a constitution, blending Western models with imperial tradition. Parliamentary government was introduced. Though true power still rested in the emperor's hands, Japan declared itself a modern empire ready to stand beside the great powers of the world, but ambition, once awakened, rarely sleeps again. 4. The empire looks outward. In 1894, Japan fought its first war beyond its own shores, against China, the ancient giant whose shadow had shaped its civilization for centuries. To the world's astonishment, the new Japanese army and navy triumphed. In less than a year, Japan seized Taiwan, humbled China, and announced its arrival as a modern empire. 10 years later, the pattern repeated, but this time against Russia. When Russian warships steamed into the Pacific, Japan struck first. The Russo-Japanese War was brutal, modern, and merciless, fought with steel, steam, and new ideas of total war. At Tsushima Strait, Japanese ships annihilated the Russian fleet, shocking the West. For the first time in modern history, an Asian power had defeated a European empire. The victory brought pride, but also a dangerous hunger. Japan had proven that discipline and will could overcome size, but it had also tasted conquest. The same machine that once turned inward to preserve peace now looked outward for expansion. The whisper of ambition grew louder. This is a skin between two worlds. By the early 20th century, Japan had transformed beyond recognition. Electric trams rattled through Tokyo. Newspapers spoke of science and progress. The emperor was no longer a remote divinity, but a symbol of unity, the living embodiment of a nation reborn. But the transformation came with a deep, quiet sadness, the same melancholy that lingers after victory. Old villages faded, old songs were forgotten, the sense of stillness that had defined Tokugawa Japan dissolved into the noise of machines. Writers and poets tried to capture what was being lost, the beauty of impermanence, the shadow between tradition and tomorrow. Haiku and novels turned from nature to nostalgia, the ache of remembering what can never return. A country that had once feared the future now ran toward it, and found, as all nations do, that progress is not peace. The shadow of the rising sun. In the decades that followed, Japan's ambitions grew darker. Industrial strength demanded colonies. Modern armies demanded wars to justify their existence. The same discipline that had built order under the Tokugawa and reform under Meiji now fueled expansion. But those later chapters of conquest, empire, and eventual ruin belong to another night, another story. Tonight, we leave Japan at the edge of its triumph and its temptation. The Meiji era ended in 1912 with the death of Emperor Meiji. In the silence that followed his funeral procession, millions of citizens bowed as one. Some wept for the man, others for the century that had vanished with him. Japan had awakened, but dreams once broken are never whole again. Chapter, the whisper continues. The tale of Japan's rebirth is not only about empires, wars, or modernization. It is about the rhythm of transformation itself, the eternal cycle of creation and loss, chaos and calm, noise and silence. From the fires of Kyoto in the 15th century to the steam-lit streets of Tokyo in the 19th, Japan's history is one long breath, a whisper that deepens, cracks, and then renews itself. When you listen closely, you can still hear it, in the wind over the temples of Nara, in the rustle of bamboo near forgotten castles, in the hum of trains crossing bridges built on ancient roads. It is the sound of time learning to speak again. Part 9. The Dream That Burned and Bloomed. Again. When Emperor Meiji's funeral smoke faded into the sky above Tokyo in 1912, Japan stood on the edge of another transformation. The Age of Awakening had ended. The Age of Consequence was about to begin. Abbes, the fragile dawn. The new sovereign, Emperor Taisho, was frail of body but curious of mind. His era would carry his name, Taisho, meaning great righteousness, though righteousness is a fragile compass in stormy weather. Japan was modern now. Trains linked provinces that had once been kingdoms. Students carried textbooks printed on foreign presses. Electricity poured from new hydroplants into cities that never quite slept. But beneath the humming wires, the heart of the country still beat in two tempos, one ancient, one industrial. Samurai blood had dried, yet its rhythm pulsed through officers in crisp Western uniforms. Peasants ploughed with iron ploughs and whispered prayers to the same harvest gods as their ancestors. The government spoke of civilization and enlightenment, yet its officials still bowed as though the past were watching from every doorway. The early Taisho years felt like morning after a fever, bright, trembling, uncertain. Parliament flourished briefly. Newspapers debated politics freely. Women's voices began to enter public life. Scholars called it the rise of Taisho democracy, a gentle breeze of liberalism drifting through corridors still heavy with incense. Students marched for universal suffrage. Artists painted crowds instead of emperors. In Tokyo, cafes, poets read French verse over bitter coffee, translating dreams from one language into another. But outside the cities, in the endless lattice of villages and valleys, the old order endured like granite under moss. Second, the earth moves. At 11:58 a.m. on September 1st, 1923, the earth beneath the capital split open. The great Kanto earthquake struck with a sound no instrument could have measured, a roar that rolled from the bay through the bones of the mountains. Within minutes, Tokyo was a sea of fire. Paper houses folded, gas mains burst. Winds turned flames into whirlwinds that devoured entire districts. When the tremors ceased, more than 100,000 lives had been erased, and the dream of the modern capital lay in ash. Yet from those ashes rose something uncanny, a determination sharper than grief. In the ruins, a new city began to take form, built of brick and steel, mapped with wider streets meant for cars and electricity. Tokyo was reborn, harder, brighter, less forgiving. The catastrophe that had nearly destroyed Japan's heart also hardened its will. But the cracks the quake revealed were not only in stone. Panic had turned neighbours into mobs. Rumour had hunted foreigners and the poor. The nation saw for a moment the fear that still lived beneath its polished surface. Fear of the other, fear of weakness, fear of change. Those shadows would not vanish, they would wait. 3. The storm of ambition. The 1930s arrived like a gathering typhoon. The Great Depression swept across oceans, toppling banks and hope alike. Factories fell silent, rice prices collapsed, farmers sold daughters to survive, and into the silence marched the army. Many officers, raised on tales of Nobunaga and Hideyoshi, saw in economic despair the chance to restore an older pride. They spoke not of parliament, but of purity, not of peace, but of destiny. Newspapers filled with slogans of Asia for Asians, and the flag of the rising sun unfurled again, this time as an emblem of conquest. In 1931, Japanese troops seized Manchuria, claiming to protect it from chaos, but in truth carving the first piece of a continental empire. A puppet state was proclaimed, railways and mines followed, dissent vanished. Those who protested, politicians, editors, professors, were silenced in the name of loyalty. By 1937, the war that had begun as whispers became a storm. Armies crossed the Great Wall into China, capturing cities older than memory. The world watched in horror as Nanjing fell, and the name of Japan, once synonymous with discipline and beauty, became shadowed by cruelty. In Tokyo, government and military blurred into one organism. The emperor remained distant, half divine, while ministers spoke in his voice. Children recited hymns to sacrifice. Factories turned out bullets instead of toys. The classroom and the barracks merged. The country that had learned to master machines now became one. Each cog obeyed, polished, and waited for the next command. 4. The fire that fell from the sky. On December 7th, 1941, the Pacific itself caught fire. Japanese aircraft struck Pearl Harbor, and the Empire declared war on the United States and its allies. For a moment, victories came swiftly. Singapore, the Philippines, vast stretches of the Pacific. Maps glowed red beneath the rising sun, but empires built on speed eventually outpaced their strength. By 1943, the tide had turned. Allies closed the sea lanes. Bombs rained upon cities whose names once meant peace: Osaka, Nagoya, Tokyo. The night of March 9th, 1945, became a furnace. American bombers scattered firebombs over Tokyo, and wooden neighborhoods turned into rivers of flame. Eyewitnesses spoke of the wind screaming. The same wind that once carried the scent of tea and tatami now smelled of burning silk and sorrow. Then came August. 2 cities, 2 flashes brighter than the sun, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In seconds, whole lives dissolved into shadow, and with them, the myth of invincibility vanished forever. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito's voice, heard by his people for the first time, flowed from every radio, a calm, archaic tone announcing surrender. The divine had become human, and the nation knelt in silence. The dream that had begun with Meiji's awakening ended in a light too bright to look upon. The Ash and the Seed occupation followed, not as vengeance but as dissection. American soldiers filled the streets once patrolled by samurai ghosts. General MacArthur's headquarters rewrote laws, dissolved armies, and redrafted the meaning of sovereignty. The Constitution of 1947 renounced war forever. Women gained the vote. The emperor became a symbol, not a ruler. Japan, for the first time in its history, was forbidden to fight. The country lay in ruins, but within those ruins slept potential, the same stubborn will that had rebuilt Kyoto, Edo, and Tokyo across centuries. Mothers planted vegetables in bomb craters. Children studied by candlelight. Factories that once forged weapons now forged steel for bridges, ships, and radios. By the 1950s, the miracle had begun. Exports grew like spring bamboo. Railways hummed again. Neon replaced firelight. A nation that had been humbled chose a new weapon: work. Discipline turned from military to industrial, and loyalty to company replaced loyalty to clan. The world called it the Japanese economic miracle. Those who had survived war built a prosperity their ancestors could never have imagined. Bullet trains, transistor radios, cameras, cars, symbols of precision and endurance, spread across the globe, carrying with them an unspoken message: we are reborn. Yet prosperity brought its own silence. The older generation spoke little of what had been done or lost. The younger, raised among glass towers, felt history as a faint echo beneath concrete floors. Between them hung a ghostly question: what does it mean to be Japanese now? 6. The Mirrors of Memory. In the decades that followed, the country searched its reflection. Films by Kurosawa, Ozu, and Mizoguchi turned the lens inward, capturing the tension between duty and desire, tradition and change. Writers like Mishima Yukio and Kawabata Yasunari sought beauty in impermanence, the ancient concept of mono no aware, the sadness of things. Temples were restored, but beneath their roofs tourists outnumbered monks. Cities expanded like tides, swallowing villages, beaches, forests. The bullet train cut the distance between past and present to hours. And yet, in the hush after midnight, the same old wind could still be heard around the pagodas, the voice of centuries reminding that all things built will one day bend. there, the quiet present. By the dawn of the 21st century, Japan had become a paradox, a land of robots and rituals, skyscrapers and shrines, anime and ancestry. The world saw neon and discipline. The Japanese saw fragility wrapped in order. Earthquakes still came, reminders that even the ground beneath progress is temporary. When the tsunami of 2011 struck the northeast coast, washing away towns and lives, the world once again saw the Japanese bow to tragedy with silence and resolve. Volunteers lined highways, strangers shared rice balls and blankets, elders whispered, "We will endure." It was the same whisper heard through every era of this story, from the wars of the 15th century to the cities of glass today. A faith not in gods or governments, but in continuance itself.